he's like,
well, those aren't the only two options.
That's how I live. I have one or two choices. Either I go out like the Punisher.
Right. I mean, I like that. But so do they ever ask, or are they not?
Yeah, I mean, they think it's funny. Like,
right.
But they think it's funny because I think it's funny.
That's right.
Like when I come home, like Daddy's in trouble again.
Right.
Oh, the government's mad at Daddy.
Yeah.
You know, like they don't. I guess if I really tweaked, they would probably tweak too.
But you set that standard of like, this is part of the job, part of the
gig, man. You know, and it's that if you can't take the heat expression. You know,
right.
You shouldn't be in this business.
Right.
So it's the business of opinions. You know, we're in the business of opinions.
Yeah.
And it's a weird fucking business because it's hard for people to have opinions today because of corporate structures, human resources. You want to make it up the corporate ladder, and there's an ideology that your company has. If it's left wing or right wing, you have to toe that line. Like, it's fucking hard for people to just have opinions. And even if they do have opinions, when do they have the time to talk about it?
That's right.
The thing about talking about opinions like we do, where you sit and talk for hours and hours, nobody has the time to do that.
What have you learned, I think, through this whole period, not only just the last year, but the last few years, about the way that friendships work at your level? Because everybody wants something from you, right?
Yeah.
You have this platform. You can share it with people. Everybody wants to get on the show. Everybody wants maybe you to endorse there. I have friends who call me like, yo, tell Joe about this opportunity. I'm like, are you on drugs? And they are, but like, how do you deal with just that? Whereas all these different people,
I say no to a lot of things.
You say no to a lot of people.
And sometimes it's uncomfortable. Like sometimes people won't let it.
And you said people come at you all different ways,
All
friends,
different
your
ways.
wife, everybody just trying to get in there.
Yeah, it's an issue. You know, I mean, I changed my phone number a lot. Right, I've got to change it again. You know, I changed it last year. I got to change it again. I have several phones. I have 4 phones now. I used to have 3, now I have 4.
That's crazy.
No, I have A, B, C, and D. You're A. Congratulations.
Oh, congrats! Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're a funny carrot. But there's a lot of people that I check that phone once.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe not even. Sometimes not even.
Who's the best guest you've had other than me in the last 7 or 8 years?
Good one.
Yeah.
There's
Was there anything? I mean,
so many serious ones.
What
so many
stands
funny
out
ones.
in my head is Peterson.
Yeah.
Classic.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Bob Lazar.
Oh yeah, that was great.
That's a great episode. You know, I don't know if he's
Mike Tyson
or not. Mike Tyson's great.
I've had a lot of great ones.
Elon
is always a great
and
one.
Alex.
Yeah, Alex is great.
Yeah.
I've had so many great ones. So many comics. Like one of the things that we've been doing is Shane Gillis, Mark Norman, and Ari Shaffir. We do this thing called the Cuddle Party.
Yeah.
Where the 4 of us, we get fucking hammered.
That's
talk
great.
the most shit. And
That's
then
great.
afterwards, like, panic. Like, maybe we should cut that part out.
Oh, that's the best. That's when you know it's good. That's when you know an episode is
Gillis
good.
was hammered.
We've only had one person, and it was Giannis Papas, come on our show where we couldn't use any of it. Because he just starts attacking, screaming about Ali Wong. I mean, he's mentally ill. We love him, but he's unwell, and we know that.
He's had too many heroes.
Yeah, and so we just couldn't use it, but God love him. But yeah, those are when you know they're good episodes.
Yeah. Well, it's... But the ones with comics are my favorite because I feel the most at home. I mean, look, I wear a lot of different hats, for lack of a better term. When I do this thing, it's very strange. Like sometimes I'm talking to a scientist. Sometimes I'm talking to someone who wrote a book about the environment. Sometimes I'm talking to a psychologist. Sometimes I'm talking to a comedian. Sometimes I'm talking to a fighter. Sometimes I'm talking to an inventor. It's like weird. It's a weird gig, man.
Yeah.
And it's only that's booking them. It's like that guy looks like fun.
How do people get on? People ask me all the time. They go, how does somebody get on that?
I seek people out.
I said, yeah, I think I'm like, he just has to want you to come on.
Yeah, that's it. There's no other way on. Right. I have to say yes. Like, there's literally no other way on.
There's also giving me $25,000. And what that'll do is increase my. It'll help. It'll help.
Yeah.
But it's not a.
I have done that once. Really? Yes. I didn't take the money, but he paid a friend, and my friend was broke. Yeah. This guy told me that if I get you on, or if I get him on your podcast, he'll give me $25,000. That was the exact number.
That's crazy.
And I said, listen, I would have that guy on anyway. Because because he's really interesting. So
Right.
yes,
Right.
you can. I love you, so you take the money,
Yeah.
and then I'll have him on. But I would just let you know I would have had him on anyway, but don't tell him that and get that money.
Good
So
for you.
that's
But yeah,
the
there's
only
no
one
way
time I've ever
on.
done.
There's just you have to be interested in what somebody is saying.
That's one of the beauties of the podcast is that it's only what I'm interested in. So whether
Right.
it's talking to Bob Lazar or talking to a fighter or talking to an artist, like people, like it's only
Right.
I have to be interested. And I'm
Right.
like, oh, I'd like to talk to that guy or Oliver Stone who was on today. I was like, Oliver Stone wanted to come on, and I don't know if you've seen his new fucking Kennedy documentary.
It's amazing.
Holy shit! It's
I haven't seen it, but
it's fucking amazing.
And
And
he
there's
goes
a
deep.
4-hour one
Where
that's
is
coming
it?
out right now until the end of February. At the end of February, it's everywhere, and he's going to release a 4-hour version.
Wow.
Yeah, fantastic.
So this will leave no doubt that it's a
Oh
coup.
my god, there's no doubt with the 2-hour one, but he says
Right.
it's a deep
With
4-hour.
the 4-hour.
But like having Oliver Stone on, like fuck yeah, Quentin
Huge.
Tarantino, fuck yeah, like
Yeah.
those kind of people. That's who I'm interested in. Can I talk to that person? Yeah, let's get
Right.
him. Go get him. Go
Let's
get
get
him.
him.
Let's do it.
Sure.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why the podcast works is because there's never a moment like you remember that Bill Hicks bit about Jay Leno sitting there
Yes.
talking to Joey Lawrence
and his blood splatters like the NBC peacock.
Yeah, he's a company man, so the bigger.
Yeah.
But it's that Jay Leno really didn't want to talk to these guys. Like,
Right.
that's the bit. Like, hey, you Lawrence. No,
Right.
Yeah, you got a
Yeah.
girlfriend? What's going
Right,
on?
right,
Well,
yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
And
You talk about people that you want to talk to.
Exactly. Like, there's no one gets on unless I'm
And so much of the rage, I think, at you is that you've really found this way to monetize enjoying stuff and satiating your curiosity and having these long, meaningful conversations. And you've revolutionized the long-form discussion.
Yeah.
And all of these other media figures that supposedly could have done it or fancied themselves to be intellectuals and to be, none of them did it. You did it. A comedian, a commentator, you did it. None of them did it. It's weird. So I think a lot of the rage in you comes from that. It's that you took a chance on yourself and it worked out, and none of them did.
Well, it's weird too in that, look, when it became long form, just because that's what I wanted to do. Like Ari was like the fucking most adamant person telling me, "You gotta change it. You gotta edit it." He would keep telling me, like, "I'm telling you right now, you're fucking up." I go, "How am I fucking up?" He goes, "You gotta edit your show. It's too long." I go, "Well, then don't listen."
Right.
He's
I
like,
love
"No."
that when he goes, people won't listen. You go, they don't have to.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I was making no money.
Right.
I was making $0. And I
Right.
was doing it every week.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where there was one time when me and Red Band were sitting around. He goes, "You have downloads yet?" I
Yeah.
go, "No." And he goes, "The episode got 1 million downloads." And it was like a record skip.
Yeah.
Like,
Right. What? Yeah. Where did
What?
that?
1 million
Yeah.
downloads?
Ari has great advice. He told me once that I should put out a tweet about Kobe Bryant, and I did. So thank God. But just so sometimes he is wrong. Sometimes
Sometimes he's wrong.
Yeah.
He's a funny guy. But he,
So
have you ever seen his dick and balls?
every day. I mean, he's. Well, I
I'll
let
show
him
it to
stay
you.
at my rental in Texas.
Sent me
and
this
he
video.
was just-
His,
I mean, all he does is expose himself indecently.
his balls don't look like they'll belong with his dick. I told him that
Yeah.
his balls seemed like his dick is a hermit crab and
Yeah.
stole his balls from someone else and then living inside of it.
He's completely out of his mind.
Say you're here with me in spirit, Jim. So, Happy New Year.
Look at those balls.
It's insane.
They're so big.
It's like elephantitis.
They're like a giant chimp.
Yeah.
Like, chimps have
Yeah,
balls.
it's like elephantitis.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
that's what it's like.
How does a family like Texas love it? They love it.
Yeah, they love it.
They love it.
Yeah, man, it's fucking great here.
Yeah.
People are so much more relaxed. And
Yeah.
what I think is really important, what I'm doing here with the club and
Yeah.
the podcast here, is I'm completely removing myself from the influence of Hollywood.
Right.
Because when you're in LA, you're still
In it. You're still in it. Yeah.
it's contagion. Yeah. In the end, you're like, ew, I got it on me. Like that disingenuous bullshit.
Right.
For, that fake sort of behavior that
Yeah.
they do. That stuff gets into our business.
Yeah.
And we have those actor types that kind of like, they dance in both worlds, and
Yeah.
they have like one foot in the actor world
Right.
and one foot in, and then they'll tweet about stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck are
Yeah,
you
what are
doing?
you
Why are you
doing?
tweeting
Yeah.
about that?
Right.
Because they're in these both worlds, and that world it contaminates things.
Right.
And comedy needs to have its own center where it's like comedy is the 100% the thing. It's not comedy to become a sitcom star.
Right.
I want to tell young comics, and I want to help them and say, hey, you don't have to do anything else.
Right.
You can just do comedy. You don't have to have anybody hire you for something.
Right.
You can be completely autonomous, and you can have all this like freedom to do podcasts, do other people's podcasts, and we all will work together as an organic network.
Yeah.
You can just practice stand-up.
Right.
Which is what everybody loves.
Right.
Everybody loves stand-up. You do those other things because you think that's what you have to do for a career.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I remember being on news radio. I remember being on Fear Factor in particular and seeing people that I knew that I started out with that were killing it in theaters and they were on the road all the time, and I would be jealous.
Right.
I'd be like, God, I wish I was doing that.
Yeah.
And I was trapped. Not trapped, obviously. It's a good trap.
Yeah.
But I was doing a show, and I was like, I can't travel.
Yeah.
I have this show I have to do all the time.
Yeah.
I could travel very rarely.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, God, this like cements in my head that I really love stand-up. I love money. It's not money. What's nice about money is you don't have to worry about money.
Right.
Because if you don't have money, then you worry about money. But
Right.
if you can have a clear head, and once you get money, don't think, oh my God, I hope this doesn't go away. Now I have to play everything safe, and I have to really
Right.
play by the rules so I get more of this Hollywood money.
Right.
Instead, what I did was go, okay, good. Now I've got some money. Now I can just be free. Now I'm gonna just do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then
For sure.
the podcast thing came out of that because it was completely organic. There was no thought whatsoever about it being profitable.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah. And the club you're going to open in a few months, and then
Yes.
a lot of people will come probably, to the club from other places too.
Well, I
Because
hope
you
so.
have a huge fan base and people will come.
The goal is to be as supportive as possible of the stand-up
Right,
community.
right.
To make an awesome place where where audiences can come, have a great time. Comics can come and know they're safe. We're
Right.
gonna have fun there. We're gonna
Right.
make
But
it
you
so
are
that
going to
it's-
require the booster.
everyone gets a booster before you go on stage. Every time. I think there's a waning period where people are like, well, the vaccine effectiveness has dropped off. Like,
Yeah.
maybe if you keep hitting people, it'll come back.
Yeah.
Just boost them every fucking week. And maybe if you die, you were supposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, people are always saying that the roads are too crowded here.
For
now.
sure.
What if we boost a lot of people?
Yeah.
One of you.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I want to thank you for taking your time. I
My
know you're a
pleasure.
busy guy. Ben's going to get you, we promise you $50. Ben, go to the ATM, get him the money.
I want to thank you.
yeah.
I want to thank you for being one of these new up-and-coming people that's very exciting, and I think you're paving the way for a lot of people that are seeing what you're doing,
Wow.
seeing you're courageous, you're a wild motherfucker, you take
Yeah.
chances, you're smart. It's awesome. I
Well,
love
thank
being
you for
around
doing
you,
this.
and I'm happy to be a friend.
Well, I am happy to be your friend, and thank you for giving me the strength to be a gamer and be trans. Good night. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tim Dillon Show. My voice is slightly, it's suffering right now. We are here with Lex Friedman, who is an intelligent podcaster, researcher. He has a podcast that has probably, right now I don't know that you can find a podcast than yours. If you look at your ability to get top tier people in every field, predominantly the things you're interested in: robotics, technology, science, physics, but you get everybody. I mean, you've had Richard Dawkins, you just had Elon Musk. How do you get the top people in those fields? And they love coming on and talking to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the universal thing that I've noticed is somebody close to those folks is just a fan of the podcast. So it's like momentum that keeps going. And oftentimes it's family members where they say, dad or mom or whatever, this guy's all about love and is kind of an idiot and it's fun to talk to. So, and then it just kind of builds like that. With Elon, a few folks were fans of the lectures I was giving at MIT, and so it's like somebody always recommends it to them.
Right.
And then some of it is also just networking. Like I just know a lot of people in the tech space, but usually it's funny for some of these busy folks. It's just somebody close to them, somebody they trust, somebody they like will say, "Hey, you should do this kind of podcast." And that because you find a lot of really busy people don't. They're very they don't know anything about podcasts.
Yeah, and they're wary of it, right? They're wary of sitting down with somebody they may not know and where that'll go and what they'll end up saying, especially a lot of people that are in positions of power. Usually they're, I spent time with the CEO of NBC once for a day. They were doing a sketch, an internal sketch to be played at their board meeting. And they hired me as a comedic actor to play a cab driver in the sketch.
Yeah.
And the whole sketch was going to be the CEO of NBC Universal, who's no longer the CEO, but he was, Steve something or other. He was going to roast the board, the people, his people. He was going to roast them in a playful, fun way, and I was going to be the cab driver. And they spent tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. The cab was on a dolly. It was being carted around New York. What amazed me about spending like a few hours with him was how tightly structured his entire life is.
Yeah.
He had a lawyer with him at all times. He had a personal assistant. NBC Universal had an attorney there. The script, which was such a simple script, had gone through 10 or 15 rewrites and redrafts. And he was a very intelligent guy, and his time had such a premium. It had such value that to say to anybody in that space, come spend 2 hours with me and just let it fly. Like I remember the first thing I saw when I saw him, he walked out and he goes, "You're the cab driver." And I said, "Yep, last white cab driver in New York." And he went, "Oh, well, that's not the right?" I said, No. Like his lawyers and his people, he's like, "Wait a minute, we're not going to say that, right?" So very interesting that you have these people that come on and they feel comfortable enough with you just
And
speak.
everything you described with the situation you were in, me, toxic, or a great combination. So I'm becoming. So one of the deeper questions here is how do you talk to people, and how do you make sure that nobody else is talking? Like, I have to vet about it. So no marketing people, no people that have a notebook and they're taking notes about things you're not supposed to say. Where they look over, is that appropriate? None of those people. Sometimes it's cool to have just friends. You just make so you can look over them and laugh. Like friends here, look over and laugh. That's great. But you may be in the first like dozen conversations, I was okay with like people being present. Now I'm like hardcore. You start at 3 hours. It has to be 3 hours. It's the Joe Rogan inspired the long phone conversation before, and then say like it's polite, of course, respectful, saying I have different ways of saying it, but like I feel most comfortable creatively, with just us two.
Absolutely.
There's a comfortable like pressure saying like I know what the hell I'm doing, and that goes back to that conversation come up, which is ultimately you have to trust me that I know what the hell I'm doing, and then I would bring out the best.
What's interesting about you, we talked about a little bit before we started, is that you don't own real estate. You don't own property. You rent. You like the freedom. And
by the way, sorry to interrupt your conversation with Joe about digital real estate.
Yeah.
Quite epic.
I think it was interesting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people responded.
Yeah, you.
Right now, real life, people tell me all the time, they go, "Are you kidding or are you serious?" And I go, real life right now is living on that line.
Yeah.
The things that are real sound like comedy. So I'm talking to Joe and I'm being funny, that's what I try to do, but I'm also bringing up real, actual trends that are happening. And people, I think, are so, removed from that world that it all sounds like comedy. And a lot of it is very funny, but it's actually a real thing that has happened. But you, what's interesting about you is the concept of ownership in the real world. You view as kind of a lack of freedom, you were saying.
Yeah, I think I value freedom to make big leaps into the unknown that is essentially important. So I also value love and monogamy, relationships, all those kinds of things.
Right.
Those put a limit on, for a lot of people, those put a limit on freedom.
Right.
I don't see it that way. So like, I think people use that as an excuse. In the same way, house ownership, people often use as an excuse to get complacent, to limit themselves. So I don't think I don't think ownership in itself is a limit on your freedom. But people get comfortable, they get soft, it becomes a limitation. Because I want to be able to tomorrow say, I'm going to start a company and I'm not going to do it in office. I'm going to do it in Kansas City. I'm going to do it in San Francisco.
Right.
Just walk away.
Yeah.
Cool guys don't look back. And that something about me, I don't want to generalize, me, I probably won't do that. Freedom to do that allows you to think big, to take leaps into the unknown in a way that materializes like the best version of yourself.
I fully agree.
As a person who bought a house.
Well, I do buy a house on it. I think that part of what I like is problems.
Yes.
Problems are essential for my business.
What's your business exactly?
It's a great question. I think it's in its very simplest form, it's making people happy. Right? That's like the simplest way to say it. And if there are no problems, there's never going to be a reason to make anything happen. That's why utopians hate comedy, because they think you can create a world in which there will be no pain. So if there is no pain, there's no reason to alleviate that pain through comedy. But I'm someone who realizes that no matter how great you make the world, you're going to have pain. You're going to have problems. So one of the reasons that I kind of like entanglements, problems, things like that, is I see a lot of opportunity to, release that valve of pressure comedically.
So you lean into the chaos because from the chaos comes a lot of problems, and then you can understand the human condition by analyzing.
I think that's part of it. I also think I have to do things to know what they are, and part of my job is to hopefully make those things fun. So by owning a house, I've owned houses that I owned one house that I lost. I'm very open about that during the mortgage crisis, right? So I went through that. And now I bought a house very responsibly. But when you buy a house very responsibly, it's still very much, a weight. It's a weight on you. You feel that weight, but there's value, I think, to weighing yourself down sometimes. Because then you understand what other people are going through. When I'm in a comedy club or a theater, I'm looking out in the audience and I'm going, all of these people have that weight. They have kids. They have, jobs. They have family members they support. They have lots of weight. So to understand that and to relate to that, for me, I value to it. But I also agree with you and completely understand that it slows you down. Houses they slow you down. Families, they're amazing and valuable, can have that effect as well. And it's well worth it to be slow. Certain times slowing down, I think, is worth it.
But you also have to be honest with yourself that the slowing down is all it's in your mind, not to be stoic for a second, but like there's no reason you can't sell the house. Well, some of it is you want to make sure you get a house you can actually afford.
Yes,
all those kinds of things. But even still, people talk about like FU money, and they use the lack of money or insufficient amount of money as an excuse to stay in the job they don't like, stay in the life they don't like, stay in the marriage they don't like, stay in the house they don't like. When in reality, you could I think it's an excuse. Like most people can take the bold action. It's a huge risk, but take a leap into the unknown, get rid of the house, and go pursue a job that you actually love, and then everything else. Will just everything.
How do you think
fall into
everybody
place.
loves something?
Yes.
So this
Yes,
is a
no.
fundamental disagreement that we have.
They have the capacity to discover something they love. Yes. So
Well, that's a different thing.
if you think that there's nothing in this world you love outside of chemical depression, so if there's just a chemistry that makes you incapable of seeing some aspect of beauty in the world, I think everybody a little flame that everybody
That stupid people. I think part of when I speak to you, I speak to a guy who's, because he's very smart, has had the privilege of speaking to very, very intelligent people. But have you ever spoken to someone who was not that smart? And I don't mean a bad person. I don't mean a malevolent human being in any way. I mean someone who's not complex. They're a simple person.
So let me just make clear that I don't like the quote unquote intelligent people or the elite people or the rich people. I like simple people. Simple people. I see myself as say I'm
but you're not. But this is what I'm gonna. You've got a robot on your floor. You interviewed the richest man in the world yesterday. This is when we have to stop. You're wearing a suit. It's 12. I mean, Rogan thinks he's a simple man too. On a river. Can we stop? This is when, as a comedian, I have to point out how insane this sounds to everyone. You're a brilliant guy. You give lectures at MIT. You're just not a simple person. I was in Buc-ee's yesterday. You know what Buc-ee's is? Smart competitor. And Bucky is a beaver, and it's a big Walmart, and people go into it and they buy everything they need. They have Bucky's nuggets, and they're like corn pops cereal. They're not good for you. They're like potato chips, essentially. They're like, these highly processed sugar food, and they're so popular. People go to Bucky's and they buy the nuggets, and they eat the Bucky nuggets on their couch.
Yeah.
Don't you understand that those people fundamentally have some differences with you?
No, I mean, okay. I just don't think so. I think they are more like they appreciate life more actually than
that may be true.
The people who are in this rat race of like so the quote unquote smart people are the people who are climbing some kind of
But if you said to some of those people, do what you love, they might say, I'm doing what I love. I love the Bucky's nuggets, and I love my couch.
First of all, if they, so I wanted to be a psychiatrist when I was growing up. So I would have to have like several months worth of sessions with them to discuss, is it true?
I think on session 2, you would realize that you're kind of going up against a brick wall.
No, I don't.
Not everybody is meant to live this fully, examined life. Many people are quite happy.
It doesn't have to be examined. You don't have to read philosophical literature. It could just be honest with yourself, like self-reflect.
Yes.
In a simple way about what the hell do you love about life.
Well, that's fair, and I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. What I think is what we've done as a society, in my estimation, this is one of our fundamental disagreements. We agree on many things.
You mean you and I?
I think we agree on a lot.
Yeah.
But then there's things we disagree on.
Like such as?
Well, I think...
Love?
No, love is important and essential.
I have to talk to you about a relationship.
We'll do that in a second. But one of the things where me and you have a disagreement is this very vague and general advice that we give to people. We tell them your life is not valid or meaningful unless you have this dream that you, or this love of something that you have to pursue, and you have to be on this journey. And to me, I know people that derive a lot of happiness from the greatest simplicities in their life. Whether that might be, and I'm not saying family is simple, but it might be just having a family. It might be just being sober. It might be just having enough money to pay the rent. So to me, tell everybody that there's that they have to love something in a way that motivates them or inspires them
maybe like there's a goal in 4 years. Yeah, no, I was
Like, you know, these great guys, David Goggins, all these people,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
running back and running out. Totally get it, right? I mean, it's great. Who is that for? Like, I know it's for people, like, the people that run up the hill are going to run up the hill. The people that aren't going to run up the hill aren't. Sometimes the people that aren't running up the hill will decide to run up the hill.
For me, the positive aspect of David Goggins is it wakes you up to consider: do I want to be a David Goggins in this world, or do I want to be something else? Like it just like shakes you up, like looking at weirdness. Like
That's a good point.
like just look at something that's completely out of the ordinary.
Right.
I mean, you could just look at any kind of weird video, I suppose, of a human being doing anything weird. It reminds you, wait a minute. So people are capable of this. So maybe I'm capable of a lot of stuff. What am I actually interested in? I was just having a conversation with somebody, and older woman. I've been practicing Russian. I've been speaking in Russian with
What's usually about you, they hired you at the FSB without even speaking Russian. They just let you.
Yeah.
That's odd. They just said you'll figure it out.
yeah. They have a whole program
Yeah.
to get you up to speed.
Fair enough.
So I was talking to her, and she said the thing that brings her happiness is like, this is gonna sound a little strange, but sort of making dinner for a family, putting everybody to just 3 kids. Like her husband is like waiting for her in bed, or he might be already sleeping, and just sitting there at the kitchen table. Also making breakfast and lunch for the next day for the kids. And just everything is done, everything is clean, everything is perfect, and she's just sitting at the kitchen table and realizing this is happiness.
Right.
And that to me was like, yeah, that's another way of happiness. And I am the same way. To me, like, I mean, one form of happiness is just being pretty good at whatever I take on. So like, I don't know, organizing any kind of stuff. I love organizing.
Right.
You couldn't tell by this place, but like, I have an OCD nature, and it makes me feel good to organize stuff, like spreadsheets or data and all those kinds of things.
Right.
That I could, people talk shit about desk, office work, but I would love that. I would love to be an Excel person, right? Just organized, or you know what, like somebody's assistant, or like schedule stuff. I love scheduling things like that. Yeah, I love it. I would, yeah.
You were talking about love earlier.
Yeah.
And you were saying it's. What are your thoughts on that as a organizing principle of people's lives? And when you see people in relationships, I know people that I think are genuinely in love. Like I think Ben and his wife are genuinely in love. But I also see other relationships that are business arrangements. And they're also successful. Truly. So
Yeah, so
it's
that
very interesting.
Yeah, partnerships.
That's right.
That's different from love. So
That's right.
Love. So broadly, first of all, love is and romantic love.
Of course.
So you have to put friendship. Like ever since I was young, I was longing for other human beings and that connection you have. You mentioned like sort of happiness is contrasted to the suffering or whatever, the hardship that people are going through, and that's kind of your job. Put yourself in a place of hardship so you can make people happy. But I always saw that there's just unfairness and cruelty and all that kind of stuff in the world, and you could just huddle like penguins together amidst that, and that's what friendship is. But aside from humans, also there's just like sitting at the kitchen table or like looking out at a tree and just appreciating to be alive. That to me is love, like that connection to just, fuck, it's good to be alive. That's feeling.
Huge. Yeah.
But romantic love, I just have seen just over and over and over again, hanging out with Rogan and Goggins in Vegas, just hanging out with their wives and seeing like, holy shit, so much of their success has to do with these people and their relationship.
That's a huge component.
And so, like, I've interacted with a lot of successful people where I don't think it's an accident, where there's this belief in each other, excitement for each other. And it's like, you also realize that what the hell are you doing in the sports? To your point, like, what are we trying to teach people? I think success is tastes the best, feels the best when you get to share with people you love.
Yes,
and that's
100%.
And that's, so to me, that seems to be essential for a happy life, is having a inner circle, a small collection of people that you just love getting excited about shit together with.
That is absolutely true.
And sometimes they're, the opposite sex or the same sex, whatever they are, then you have sex with them.
Yes.
For many years.
Right. And let me ask you an interesting question.
That's how that works.
In your estimation, I look at Jeffrey and Ghislaine and I say they were in love. That was a very deep and powerful love.
I see the same. I look at you and Ben the same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He's just Ghislaine.
We are not as successful as Jeffrey and Ghislaine.
You had.
By the way, no. But what I mean about that, right, is you have this from the outside world. This is very interesting, right? Everything you just said is beautiful and true, but let's look at the other side of that. So to us, Jeffrey and Ghislaine are having this amazing love. They genuinely, deeply love each other.
Do you think so? By the way,
it seems so. Right? I mean, they look at each other. I mean, they really truly seem to love and trust each other.
Yeah.
Right? They built this empire. And
nothing bonds you like the ones in the world.
True. So my question is valid the love that they have for each other? Because it does check a lot of the boxes of what you talked about, where it's like huddling together, up against the world.
Yeah.
Is that a valid love?
Yeah, it is.
It is.
But it binds you to such
the harm you're doing to others.
So like love of nation, something I also have.
Right. Which nation?
That's funny. You should ask. No, of course, man. I'm American through and through, which is what I would say on a podcast that's televised.
I live in Austin, Texas. Nothing more American.
Really sucks. I'm shooting guns now. Cowboy hat just to make people believe. And can we edit out the part where I talk questions? That's not going to fit the brand that I'm trying to sell. No. You grow up in the Soviet Union with the idea. I grew up in the Soviet Union with the idea of love. So much of it was propaganda. There was, literally the national anthem says, ironically enough, we're the greatest country on earth, indestructible.
The Soviet anthem is the greatest anthem ever written. I play in the car with Ben. It's the most powerful. If you want to talk about prowess, I mean, it's amazing.
And I don't know, you should look at the lyrics because they say we're indestructible. There's the American national anthem, kind of polite. It's proud, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
The Soviet national anthem is like, we're the baddest motherfuckers on this planet.
Right.
Destroy us, like they collapse. Yeah. So there you go. They changed it quickly. After that. But so that's the love of country. Hitler is an example of somebody that very effectively sold their love of country.
Right.
So love doesn't necessarily create good in the world.
Right.
This is more kind of
because love is a very powerful force, a flying force.
Yeah.
When you talk about propaganda in the Soviet countries, you've seen American propaganda, you've seen Soviet propaganda. How does American propaganda function differently, or does it, than what you remember growing up in the Soviet Union?
Maybe you could speak to what you see as propaganda, because there's so many beautiful flavors of propaganda. In the United States, what I remember from the Soviet Union, there's a centralized government. freedom of speech, but the desire in each human heart, in each American, like the obsession with the individualist freedom, right? Is like insatiable.
Let's see what's going on. Are you a furry?
Another narrative, so it's a competition of narratives. Which ones go from there? So ultimately, where the social where everybody legitimately believed the story told in the United States because of the competing narratives. I feel like everybody is constantly skeptical about it. You're very cynical, skeptical.
To me, it feels like the sexual miscontrol is not for lack of trying. Like the lack of sexualized control is not for lack of trying. It feels like you have this carcass, this dead animal by the side of the road, and you have vultures on the taking a little bit of it, and the animal's maybe still alive, and it's mowing and go, ooh. Those are the stories you get. It does feel like this wasn't sexualized.
So the centralized effort is the dead animal inside the room, and you're the vultures.
We're the
keep the freedom of
we're the people who are sustaining ourselves by coming in and saying, hey, we possess the technology and the ambition to also have a voice in a very crowded space where a lot of people want a voice. But I think you're absolutely right. But what I see is that there's a real danger that sexualized, meaning that you have very few companies that have an enormous amount of power, and you have a lot of different people and a lot of different beliefs and narratives. You know, every institution, somebody said this once, and I believe that, every institution seeks power through control. And that's something that I've seen with the COVID over the last 12 months. You've seen people banned, you've seen people have their accounts frozen, they've been demonetized, they've lost careers, they've lost their ability because they've had a different opinion and a different view. Robert Malone was your ancestor from Twitter. This is one of the creators of the mRNA vaccine, right? I don't know why we can't live in a society where random people is allowed to have an opinion. I don't know why we can't live in a society where Rogan is allowed to have an opinion. Right? He is now. Right? But
wait, just to clarify, you want him to be banned?
well,
I think that would make that sound. I wasn't sure if he was doing the job.
No. I don't see that.
But
Yeah. Well, Joe Show's not big, so I don't think it needs to be bad. My
when you get to a certain level,
I'm
surprised you're not banned yet.
they will not. Well, it's
You do know I
yeah, I don't think that's the problem. He's not. I think he's like this libertarian guy with a beard who actually does believe in free speech. Twitter was the freest of all of these. Now, I think Zuckerberg's a problem. I think he's isolated. Truly, I think the people in his group are a problem, and I think
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Actually, so on Zuckerberg,
yeah.
because I have the same kind of intuition, but how do we know for sure? Because it feels like some of it is also narrative.
I think if he wants to be a good guy, and I think if you want to be a good guy, and you want the world to see you at all times as a good guy, you're going to be very valuable. And if you don't have values that are set in stone, at any given time, I mean, look at the last year. In the beginning of the last year, mentioning that the virus came from maybe potentially from a lab in China made you an hysterical racist, some crazy reaction. Now, it's a pretty well established, reasonable hypothesis. That's only 12 months you've seen voicing that opinion go from exile from polite society to pretty reasonable, rational behavior. Now, if you believe in freedom of speech, you ride that wave. And you say, you're allowed to have this opinion, and you're allowed to have this. If you're looking to be a good guy, well, back there, you're going, that opinion's not allowed. But then, a year later, you go, we'll allow it now. So if you're constantly going with taking the temperature of public opinion and these institutions that are around you. And when I say public, I don't mean the public, I mean the small set of people that really find public discourse. That's my worry about Zuckerberg. Is if he wants to be seen as good all the time and he wants to be liked all the time, and that can cause you to
But a lot of those words you like, right? I want to be a good person.
you don't on Facebook. So the point is that my aunt wants to be liked all the time. She's unemployed. So when you control one of the massive exchanges of information in the world, why don't you having a basic human trait can be a lot more dangerous than a comedian who has very little power, in terms of
So your sense is that anybody who lines up in a position, your ability to truly have a good sense of who you are and what personality is, it's corrupt.
I think that's what Jack probably left Twitter.
So he makes sense that it's something.
I think Jack is basically, I can't do it anymore, and Jack speaking completely out of turn. I've never met him or spoken to him, but what I do think is that he, from my belief system, did believe in it. Now, that doesn't mean everything he believed in, his company did not behave that way all the time. I don't think they executed always. But I think there was some overarching belief in the freedom of people to exchange their opinions. Now that's starting to get curbed later in his tenure, and now he's gone, and it scares me what's coming next.
So I think that belief in the freedom of speech is an interesting one, and as a platform, because they have a lot of videos of rape, violence being uploaded, and so they have to remove something from the platform.
That's right.
And it becomes a slippery slope. From every platform, which they realize, every social media platform, even the ones that advocate freedom of speech, they have a lot. If you cross, you don't. So I think 8chan was the one that was created that said, like,
We're saying there's no line, but I think even they had a line, and that was a big thing.
Well, I there should be, right? I mean, in terms of like child pornography, rape, violence, scenes of gratuitous violence, right? Threatening people to a point, doxing people, putting out their personal information, encouraging harm, right? There are all these lines in a society. What I don't know, I don't think those lines should necessarily be political, and I think that's what I've seen more and more of.
I think my biggest problem is sort of determining lines from a place of arrogance and humility. So I really like it when people kind of approach all of this with a high degree of uncertainty about how much they truly understand the world. So to me, the problem isn't the drawing of a line; it's the drawing of a line with arrogance, like as if you know better. And so, I mean, you could see reasonably that quote unquote misinformation about a pandemic could be viewed in a boardroom at Facebook or whatever social media company as something that could lead to the death of millions, right? So from their perspective, they could say, all right, well, we want to stop the spread of misinformation. So everything they use is the word ivermectin or something like that.
Right.
But you have to have a humility that, wait a minute, maybe we don't perfectly know what are the solutions to this pandemic. Be open-minded here. Maybe very specific figures in the scientific community aren't the sole possessors of the truth. Even the scientific having the arrogance about that is really dangerous. To me, the reason I'm bringing all this up is I hope it's possible to be at the scale of Facebook, at the scale of Twitter, and have the humility to actually have a product that does good for the world.
Right.
Like constantly ask yourself, wait a minute, are we doing the right thing here? As opposed to kind of having very specific metrics about engagements and those kinds of things that
In your estimation, is there impact, just like every business, the monopolies are so inevitable, seemingly. Like, we have all these smart people in America. We have all these, capable people in tech. But all of these massive, whether it's Amazon or Facebook, there's really 5 companies that control everything. And it seems to me that's going to be the way that it'll be forever. And does you disagree? Okay, well, that's good. I would love it to change.
it's a new, so tech, everything we see with the internet is new. People coming up that are, I would place the problem complicated, but let me try to explain. I think one of it has to do with money. So what happens is, like these big companies, they acquire. So the moment you become successful, they start acquiring you. And to me, one of the things that I value, like for me, I have a dream to start a company, and I know for sure we'll never sell that company. Believe in your idea, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs that I see now that really believe in an idea, and in that way you can build a larger number of companies that create a market of ideas, and how you can do social media, how you can do whatever we're talking about, how you can do platforms that show video, platforms that show images, all those kinds of things. And then you could have a competition in terms of censorship, in terms of how data is stored and shared, how much transparency there is about the data. So I have a hope for that. So I don't think it always has to be that way. One of the problems is that just Facebook keeps acquiring everything that comes up.
So when companies sell, they just lose control. And whatever that initial idea was gets potentially perverted to fit someone else's idea or someone else's profit model.
And there's a kind of complacency within big companies where they lose track of what made them great in the first place. Just constantly questioning, are we doing the right thing? How can we do this better?
Right.
So that urgency you have when you're going to go bankrupt if you do make the wrong decision, that's what startups have. And you can never lose that urgency. That's what Steve Jobs was great at. Artificially or not, creating urgency. Like we need to constantly create a new idea, constantly create an idea. Those people are rare. Elon's example.
I do think that one of the the weaknesses, I think, of the pro free speech contingent of people is they don't appreciate the complexity of the issue. It is very difficult. Yeah. Like all the things we talked about, violence against children, threatening things, making people's home addresses available. Like there is a lot of gray. So I certainly the job that somebody like Jack Dorsey has, right? I don't envy Mark Zuckerberg's job. These people are dealing with foreign manipulation. They're dealing with bad actors in their space. They're dealing with organized troll campaigns directed from other places. So I don't envy that. It's an insanely difficult thing to do, especially because we're living more and more online. More and more people, their ability to earn a living, their ability to market themselves to companies, all rests on their ability to have a digital identity. So when you look at this stuff, you go, it's, and all these, things that so it's like QAnon networks, Parler and all these things, are like, explicitly political. They go, well, who could throw off Twitter? You can go on Parler. You go on Parler, you're like, okay, this is Looney Tunes, right? You're going into this crazy bubble. You're going into this crazy bubble where a lot of it's not basic reality at all.
It's a hard problem to solve.
Because it's hard.
You can see it like Parler, you can see it at home, and then you look there, and it's like there's just a bunch of hate, like it's fun to hang out there.
Right. So you go, you need a little bit of hate.
You need a little bit of hate.
It's just like it's a little bit of hate. Because a lot of people are getting rid of hate wholesale in the schools. And I believe I should go back and just go get a
little bit of hate. That's your TED Talk.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of hate. You need a little bit of hate. You need a little bit of, contention. You need people who have different ideas to be able to fight it out a little bit without completely saying you have to use this service and you have to use that service. You know? But it's tough. It's difficult.
You know Tom Waits?
Yeah, of course.
He's got that song, I Like My Town, a little drop of poison.
Yeah. That's true.
I actually kind of see you as that person in that type of, I think it's in Shrek,
Yeah.
where this is like an old man and a child playing piano.
Right.
You got a voice down.
Yes. It's you're rasping.
Over time, becoming more and more complex.
That's very true. It's my final form is confidence. My final form is the piano. 2 out of 3 men will experience some form of hair loss by the time they're 35. More than 50 million men in the U.S. suffer from male pattern baldness. There are only 2 FDA-approved medications that can prevent hair loss. Keeps offers both. Okay? Keeps is something that a lot of people I know have had great success with. They offer simple, stress-free way to keep your hair. Convenient virtual doctor's consultations and medications delivered straight to your door every 3 months. You don't have to leave your house. Low cost. Treatments are only $10 per month. They start there. Keeps offers generic versions of the FDA-approved big hair treatment medications on the market. Discreet packaging and improved their results. Keeps has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors. Prevention is key. Treatment can take 4 to 6 months to see results. Act now. Okay? So if you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to KEEPS.com/Tinder to receive your first month of treatment for free. That's KEEPS.com/Tinder to get your first month free. KEEPS.com/Tinder to get your first month free. So be on your way to hair. Be on your way to saving your hair. BetterHelp. Everybody's mentally unwell. Their brain has been shattered. You need help, so get BetterHelp. Better H-E-L-P. They're hiring more counselors everywhere. Because you can start communicating in under 48 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. This is professional counseling done securely online. There's a broad range of expertise available, which may not be available in many areas. The service is available for clients worldwide. You can log into your account anytime, Rex, and send a message to your counselor.
I love them, by the way.
You can get timely. Is that a robot coming nuts? You can get timely.
He needs help too.
Yeah. You can get timely and thoughtful responses from your counselor. You start communicating so quickly. Everybody loves you. Don't like your counselor. You can just switch to another one. It's not a big deal. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp helps you to start living a happier life today. Visit their website and read their testimonials and posts daily. Okay, BetterHelp.com/review. Visit BetterHelp.com/review. BetterHelp. Join over 1 million people. Take charge of their mental health and need help from an experienced professional. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp. They are recruiting so many new additional counselors to meet the demand. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Tyndall Show listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/MT. What do you think the challenges are for because you have this new internet Web3, as they call it, right? Digital tokens, crypto. Are you a believer in this? Are you a skeptic? I mean Web3 or crypto? Well, that's a good delineation. Web3 is not something to believe in or not, right? And that's just kind of here. Do you believe that crypto is going to help things decentralized? Or do you believe that absolutely happening?
Yeah, so, I had a lot of conversations, cryptocurrency, all the different, I give you about all the different cryptocurrencies that are exciting to me. But to me personally, zero of it has to do with money. So I, like financial, you call it investment. Right. So a lot of people, that's part of the problem with this space is a lot of people just want to make money and they want to make a quick buck. So their excitement is exaggerated by the fact that they're investing in a particular coin. And so to me what's interesting is the different technologies involved and they're amazing. So
explain briefly to people that are unaware of what blockchain technology is. Because maybe they have not come in contact with anyone who has made it their business to yell at them for 10 hours about it.
Well, it's a pretty tough task. Maybe one nice way to do it is mention some of the key technologies that are competing. So, the original implementation of cryptocurrency on the blockchain is Bitcoin, and one of the defining aspects of it is its proof of work. So it's very difficult. It's grounded physical reality in a way that gold grounded to physical reality, and that's really powerful. And also it's powerful because no governments can control it. And so there's a finite amount, and there's a finite amount of it still. So the scarcity is enforced, so it's going to hold its value. There's a lot of nice properties to it. And then the negative side, the transactions are very slow and expensive. So people have constructed like layer 2 technologies, which is using Bitcoin for the great things that Bitcoin does, and having the fast transactions that you want, like if you want to pay for dinner. There's layer 2 technologies like Lightning Network is an example of this. It's on top of Bitcoin. Okay. Then there's Ethereum with
Now, blockchain is like when people talk about a ledger, and what would they, like, how would you break that down to somebody who's like, wait a minute, what you guys are you talking about? It's a way that all of these transactions are, stored.
Yeah, so it's basically a database. Right. It's a way to store data in a way that cannot be falsified or sort of attacked and falsified and faked and changed by anybody. Because there's a lot of people that have a consensus mechanism that are monitoring and have full access to that data. That the blockchain just means store of data that has a temporal component, so there's a sequence to it, and nobody can modify it. Okay. So, like, this is like secure, reliable, in the way that physical reality is secure and reliable. If you break a glass, it's broken. That's a fact. That nobody can unbreak that glass, right? And they can convince you never broke. Fake news. Like that reality happened. The same way, blockchain is the first technology of its kind that in a digital space that allows you to have that same reliability across the population. The same way that physical reality is reliable, blockchain just stores information in a reliable way. Nobody less. And everybody just uses that blockchain in different ways. I mean,
is it one blockchain or there's several?
Yeah, each one, there's one per
One is enough to use. There's another one, Ethereum blockchain.
Yes, right. Yeah. And then Ethereum has a lot of properties. Right. Of course, it's evolving. Ethereum 2.0, I think, it's supposed to come out in 2022. So
the founder of your show,
brilliant guy, really humble. So some of these cryptocurrencies don't have one figurehead. They have a community of people, a community of developers. Right. Obviously, not obviously, but among the Bitcoin creator founders, Anonymous, Satoshi Nakamoto.
Right, that seems to be less true.
I would be surprised if yours Satoshi Nakamoto.
Well,
You're saying
people are seeming, they're drawing a line around a group of people. It's got to be one of them, right?
yeah.
It's not like it can be anybody. Right?
But that's the beauty of it.
Right.
That you don't know. And that's a powerful idea. It's not the anonymity. But then Vitalik Buterin, who's the co-founder of Ethereum, is kind of like the figurehead that he represents it. And so, and there's a few others, like another co-founder of Ethereum is Charles Hoskinson, who created Cardano. That's a very interesting piece of technology. Also, I would say that smart contracts, which is ways to use the blockchain to make agreements between people that exchange assets, or like, the same kind of contracts you do between people. So that's really interesting. There's moving away from the proof of work, which requires you to use a lot of resources.
Explain that. Explain proof of work. When you said it grounds Bitcoin, the physical reality. Explain proof of work.
Proof of work, you have to solve a cryptographic puzzle on computers. And computers have to do a really hard thing, a long time to solve it. You have to have a giant number of computers doing a giant number of computations.
That's why it takes all this energy.
It takes all this energy.
Yeah.
But that's why it's very difficult to think. It's very difficult for a large number of people to get together and say we're going to create a bunch of fake Bitcoin. So this really grounds it. You always have to come back to this mining effort of performing the computation. There's another.
Now, what is it? It's a math problem. Essentially, it's a math.
It's a simple math problem you have to do a lot.
To get one Bitcoin. To mine one Bitcoin. And how many computers have to do this?
As many as you want. You can be mining Bitcoin
With one computer.
long
That would
computers.
take a long time.
Take a very long
So
time.
how many computers do you need if you want to make quick work of it?
It sounds like you're starting. You get ideas in your head.
Yeah.
I think it's getting less and less possible to really make money with this mining effort. I'm actually not paying too much attention of where the major mining facilities are. China recently banned mining, Bitcoin mining. So they banned cryptocurrency and banned mining. So all the mines that were in China had to move elsewhere. But I think it's distributed across the world. I think there's in South America, there's in
And one of the reasons that Elon, even made
some here in Austin, so I think they're
sure, I'm sure there are. Elon engineers might say it needs to be a greener, more environmentally friendly process. This is due next year.
Yeah, see what the Bitcoin folks will say is yes, it's not environmentally friendly, but the benefit you get far outweighs the cost. So there's a lot of stuff we do that's not environmentally friendly. Driving cars, eating meat, and the argument is like, well, the benefit to society is much higher than the cost that is to the environment. So like, don't just find a boogeyman just because you want. They just see it as another way to attack Bitcoin.
Okay.
But yes, it's bad for the environment, but so are a lot of things. Absolutely, it's an argument they will make because this has the opportunity to revolutionize the monetary system across the world. So one of the downsides of the way money is used in the world is used by governments to control the populace. That's right. There's a lot of people that talk about authoritarian regimes that use inflation, use money to control people. So Bitcoin allows to start wars, do everything. And so
To fund gain of function research into diseases and wreak havoc.
basically, I've been thinking about what I want to talk about this year. I really don't.
Come on. You think he'll come out?
So this was a discussion here. He said yes, but the problem is he wants to do 15 minutes. So he doesn't know who I am or anybody. It's the same podcast problem. I said no, it has to be 3 hours. And so because I do this one example of a person again that has a lot of not again, but there's a lot of positive aspects to him. That he's accomplished a lot of incredible things in his life.
He started AIDS. I mean, that's a huge thing. That was a big deal.
Yeah, it's very impactful. Hitler was, I think, man of the century for the 20th
He
century.
killed people's.
Hitler did?
No, Fauci, your friend.
He's not my friend.
And then him and Bill Gates. But I don't know about that. Bill Gates is buying up all the farmland.
What's the connection between Fauci? There must be.
They're disease freaks.
Yeah.
They like diseases a little too much.
Yeah.
Listen, I understand when you spend your life researching pandemics, they're a little too excited about it.
It's Nietzsche. If you get into this,
That's right.
is back into you.
Fauci's also Italian. They have many defects.
a big problem.
They have many defects.
Yeah. And I
He's
think
more suited to make pizza or be a maitre d' at a restaurant than he is to be a scientist.
it makes perfect
The
sense.
Italians are not bad. The Italians are criminals. And they're meant to be in So wherever they are, they're going to commit crime. So if they're in a pizzeria and it's a cash business, they can steal some of the money and feel good about themselves. But when they're in the government, they can steal so much money that they get too much power. So Fauci is a problem.
Primarily because he's Italian.
That's a huge part of it. But he's a power crazed vaccine Hitler. Go back to the Ethereum and the canary in the coma.
Let me just wrap up this apology.
Yes.
To quickly say that I do think, as a political leader in the response to this pandemic, he did a terrible job. He didn't just represent science. There is a lot of things to say about him, but none of those things come to mind for me.
I think he did a poor job in the pandemic. I think he did a good job starting it.
Yeah. Tim Dillon speaking here.
This is our
man who also called him something Hitler. It was beautifully, it's poetic the way he referred to him as Hitler. I forgot the name. Fauci, yeah.
Vaccine Hitler.
Vaccine Hitler, thank you. That was very good.
We should have 4 shots, 5 shots, 6 shots. I'd like to study diseases and then we'd like to link them into the population and see what happens. And then tell my kids get divorced because bills on everything's island. Fauci didn't even get a right against Scotland. That's how big of a loser he is.
Yeah, I'm sure that's Bill Gates.
So you will be believe in the transformative effect of crypto rather than the investment side of it.
Yes, but not like a big believer in the way, because a big believer in crypto space means something else, because there's really big believers in the crypto space. I think there's certain cultish aspects to cryptocurrency supporters where they're not able to see, not always able to approach things with humility and open mind.
Well, it's really humor, right? That's why people also poke fun at things. That's when people realize the value in that. The value in like not taking yourself so seriously. You know who's great at it? Nobody watches when they're great.
Yeah.
You can make fun of stuff, they get it. Gary Vee is actually really good. I was texting with him, he understands. Like, people that surprise them, people understand humor. And then there's a lot of people that don't understand humor. That don't understand the value, because humor, at its core, at its base, all it seeks to do, right, is to, I think, just take down these sacred cows. And it doesn't mean that the sacred cows aren't sacred for a reason, right? Making a joke about Jesus doesn't mean that Jesus wasn't this tremendously impactful figure in history that millions of people have put there. It doesn't mean that. What it means is that what humor has this unique ability to do is maybe make anything more accessible to people. I think it makes things accessible. It takes kings off thrones. And so people that believe so much in Bitcoin, it can take a joke. The crypto world can take a joke.
Yeah, and that's why I'm a big fan of you. That's why I've been honored that you make fun of me a few times.
And you just love it.
I love it. I like,
I mean, it's never nasty
no.
or mean. That's not this.
No, I like smart people acting silly versus silly people acting smart. I like that. I'm not necessarily saying I'm smart, but I certainly err on the side of the silly. Because that's why Elon is also an inspiration that, despite everything else, he's able to be ridiculous.
That's what I like about it. He kind of pokes the bear.
Yeah, and he doesn't get like, you make fun of a bunch, doesn't care.
Doesn't care.
And not even fuck people.
I don't think that's why Albert even knows that I've been.
Oh, man, I'm sure that's not true. Actually, but that'd be interesting. No.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's on his radar. Yeah. I also think if it was on his radar, you wouldn't have any drone strike. I think he'd just chop.
Yeah, exactly. Just chop it. But, yeah, of course, there's different kinds of humor, too. There's this, I mean, he's more in the dad jokes, silly memes category of humor. You're more like, I'm going to do a tweet thread and just lay back some like how great Kim Jong-un is for the world. And, you know,
He's fat forward.
fat positive.
Fat forward.
Always considering you
Fat forward.
fat forward.
meaning that he believes the future is fat.
Yeah. Progressive fattest. Yeah.
He's an interesting you're involved with a lot of very interesting people. This technology, the robotics that you're into, all of these countries, right, are competing for, I guess the word would be supremacy in a lot of these arenas, right? If China has the best technology, China's going to export it to everybody. If the U.S. has the best technology, the U.S. is going to export it to everybody. There's a lot of intellectual property concerns. There's a lot of shadowy intelligence figures that embed themselves in institutions, trying to gain access to a lot of like highly sensitive stuff being developed and stuff like that. When you look at the landscape and you see a country like China, I've had journalists on my show that have said they believe that China is very influential in terms of like, they see a lot of American U.S. corporations saying that we have to adopt a lot of these Chinese technologies, surveillance states, social credit scores, things like that, so that we can then export them to the rest of the world. We have that hegemony. Does that worry you at all that we're in competition with an authoritarian country, and that in order to beat them, we may have to become them?
Yeah, of course that worries me. So, for example, in the AI space, there's a recent report from the United States that they are now fully engaged in developing autonomous weapon systems because China is developing them. The argument was made that, you know, we're willing to go into the race for development of artificial intelligence-driven weapons because that's for the good of the world because China's doing it. So if you don't do it, then they're going to do it. And that's how any kind of bad thing happens. So I'm really worried about that because there's a lot of people saying like developing robot dogs, for example. The main concern here actually is drones. Drones are terrifying. People have there's some kind of magic connection that people have with freaking robots. For example, because it just connects them to dogs and cats and humans, but they're not actually very good at committing violence compared to drones.
Drones are great at it.
That's the development of autonomy. Currently, most drones are remotely controlled, and the degree of autonomy is minimal in terms of drones that they're doing.
But we're moving into an arena where you would have drones just deciding who and when to blow people up.
Well, it's more and more greater and greater degrees of automation. So let's say, okay, this location, this building is a terrorist, and currently you have remote controlled operation of the drone where you can target very precisely that particular building. But then you can start seeing, going to a place where, okay, these are the set of locations we believe the terrorists are located in. But let the drone start to decide what is the most likely of those locations.
Right.
And then you get to more and more automate the decision about where to launch the bomb or the missile. And then you start to expand the region of automation, where now there would be a set of drones that just monitor the presence of terrorists in a particular city. I mean, it just becomes a slippery slope where when you take the human out of the loop of the decision making, you start to commit, have the capacity to commit vastly unethical things. But yeah, that really worries me. But also another thing that kind of worries me is the warmongering. So on the flip side, I've actually talked to a bunch of folks that live in China that Americans have a way of seeing the rest of the world as kind of flawed and that has the right chance of everything, how to live life, the idea of freedom, that we're the good guys. I mean, every country has this idea. We have to be careful with that because I think you have to try to understand another culture.
Agreed.
So it's not obvious to me that the Chinese government is absolutely unequivocally like evil.
Right.
They have a very different culture. Like, I've interacted with folks in many ways. Their culture is very different. Like the value of uniqueness and innovation, for example, is not there in the same way it is in the United States. So Chinese folks, Chinese engineers, Chinese entrepreneurs are more okay with copying ideas,
Right.
like legally copy. The way I would say Bill Gates and Microsoft copied ideas. Their whole approach was, let's see what Apple does and take the best ideas from Apple, from Netscape, from Firefox, from Google. They take ideas and they try to make it better. That kind of way of thinking is just very fundamentally different from the United States. And if you constantly call them out for like stealing or something like that, it's just constantly trying to create tension where there doesn't necessarily need to exist tension. Now, there's obviously a lot of aspects of surveillance state that they're trying to create that are really worrying about human rights. But again, I just feel like you have to lead. You have to start by trying to understand it.
I think one of the things that I like that they do is that when they have a problem with someone in their society, usually a very wealthy person, like a billionaire, instead of like beating around the bush, they just disappear that person until they can be re-educated. Now, it's hard, but here's the thing. I think we bring all these billionaires before Congress and we like yell at them. We have like these Midwestern congressmen be like, you're making all this money, nobody's got any money, we are not playing. But the reality is, instead of that, why not kidnap and torture these people?
Disappear. Allegedly tortured. So, I mean, I'm not that's really bad if that's happening.
Well, I think you like it. I'm also saying we seem anemic. This is my serious point behind the joke.
Yeah.
We seem impotent to control anybody in this country if they've got enough capital.
Yes.
China does not.
So
that's interesting.
And currently, China making a lot of centralized decisions that are actually good for society. So there's a lot of people discuss interesting. Like if you set the human rights violation aside for a brief moment, if you look at the markers in terms of the economy, in terms of the actual quality of life across the population, it's increasing rapidly. So the problem is, that's the problem with communism. Like you could do a lot of good for it in the short term, but it's a slippery slope of power. That's right, corrupts people. Yeah, my biggest worry in China is if there's an overbearing government, it's not the disappearing billionaires. It's the fear that overtakes the populace where they can't speak up. It's the self-censorship. It's not censorship, it's self-censorship.
What do you think people get wrong about Vladimir Putin?
This is a very touchy subject on this particular program.
Well, what do you mean by that?
You become, not that Larry King is past that, you become the new Larry King.
That is true. That is unequivocally true. No one will deny that.
What did they get wrong?
Well, because he's a historical figure.
Yeah.
And a present. You, growing up in the Soviet Union, you have an understanding of him maybe as a leader that other people don't, right? From the West or from outside. One of the things I was highly critical of was when our government, our CIA, was like fomenting coups in the Ukraine, encircling Putin, encircling Russia. And then when Putin would respond to that, we'd go, what a monster. But I mean, if he was doing that to us, we'd have the exact same reaction. This is what I mean about propaganda and narratives emerging, right? So, however, that being said, it does seem like there's a consolidation of power that is unhealthy.
So I'll say one, just building on your previous point of the CIA and the FSB and the KGB, there's a game being played there. There's a game being played in the shadows, and there's a bunch of people that are very good at this game. And I think what I can say about Vladimir Putin is I think he's very good at this game. And I personally don't like that such a game is played, that anything is done in the shadows, that there's this manipulation that's happening. There's this game being just spying at each other. There's cyber attacks all around the world. Information, manipulating information, like creating narratives that get like the American populace pissed off about something, and then America creating narratives in Europe that gets Europe pissed off at Russia. All those things. That's a game. Geopolitics. Henry Kissinger is somebody who's incredibly good at this game, and the fact that like such a game has to be played is deeply dishonest and destructive to the world. So I mean, but that it's a fascinating game, and what troubles me most, of course, is that we know so little about it. There's a giant number of conspiracy theories, but they're just flirting at the door of truth. They're not. You can't. Are not transparent, unfortunately. So I just want to say that there's kind of in Russia a discussion, especially amongst young folks, and it's certainly in the United States, that sounds similar to the way people analyze Donald Trump, which is saying that Putin is dumb, that Putin is just a lucky idiot, and that's not true. Well, there's a lot of people that believe this, and what I personally believe is he's a very intelligent man. And in terms of the game that we're just referring to. Oh, of course. The other thing I should mention that people might know, the reason I find him fascinating as a figure is he's very intelligent in conversation. So he's able to analyze the world in very interesting ways. And leaders aren't always that intelligent in conversation, or just as as analysts of history, analysts of the present geopolitics of the world, and as you would appreciate humor, right? And like dark humor, right? So that's what makes it fascinating to me. Obviously, what also makes it fascinating is that I've been following for 20 years now, 20 years, and I think power has changed him, and sometimes in the English direction, but it has. I think he was a different man at the beginning of his role. I don't want to say too much podcasting into what that is, because it requires a lot of context, but there was, let's just say that I as somebody was in the Soviet Union in the 90s, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was true suffering and uncertainty. That was a really, really difficult time. And what Putin did is there's a significant economic recovery that started in the 21st century with him at the rule. And so that's why still a lot of people see him a powerful leader, because he saved Russia from the collapse of the Soviet Union, from like the destructive aspects of the Soviet Union. Yeah, from looting. Yeah, but also the financial system is wrecked. Yeah, and there's oligarchs just kind of all around somewhere. And that's one of the difficult realities you have to see or think about when you think about Putin, is the context in which he operates, the level of corruption all around. There is some aspect to Russia where a strong leader, as short term, is necessary to keep the corruption at bay. And that's a dark reality, and I don't think it's I think all revolutions are painful. That doesn't mean let's go with them. But if you just analyze the situation as it currently is, Russia's in a very difficult place. As a human being, just for me, it hurts my heart because I know the culture of the 20th century, Soviet Union. There's so much love in mathematics and science, poetry and music. There's something about the World War where tens of millions of people died. They create some of the most beautiful art, great songs, and so much of that. I think it's just a beautiful place that culturally can flourish and be part of the world. And currently it's not able to be as much a part of the world as it could be. So science and tech, there's just so little communication the United States and the rest of the world with Russia.
What do you think the next, when Putin steps down, what does the future of that political system look like?
That's just the scary thing. It's not good. That's why a lot of people say, well, I like this good now. And they're afraid of the uncertainty of people stepping down.
Would you have him as a guest on the show?
Yes.
Do you think he would do it? Really?
Yeah.
When will he do it?
You're the very thing. Soon.
Interesting. Do you think he will do a podcast tour where he also do a show?
It's so hard.
That's another show.
That's scary. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably Joe Rogan first.
It'd be great if he did it.
Yeah. I told Joe to be a translator. So he speaks pretty good English, actually. But he doesn't speak English publicly because you kind of have to.
He only needs to understand one word. Ivermectin.
He would probably say that there's a Russian vaccine. Or, the
Yeah, what is the Russian vaccine?
I see you probably answer the show with the scientific analysis of
No, I'm just curious because I son back to China. What is the Russian vaccine?
Yeah, I don't know if you know the details.
I know the name of it.
It's Sputnik 5 or
Sputnik 5
or something.
Is it on it? Sputnik 5.
Fact check that.
Kovacs.
That's not the.
No, that's not the Russian one, then.
What kind of mediocre research team do you have here?
I mean, he's not a research kid. Yeah, thank you. Who's he working with? That's your question.
Well, he's the just like national party operation and shit.
Who do you think is a lot of people didn't even make resolutions this year. You know what? I get it, but that doesn't mean you should still find ways to shake things up. Whether it's by switching up your lookout routine and going someplace new. Whatever way you want to challenge yourself, this year is no better way to do it. The pair of Raycon wireless earbuds in your ear. Raycon wireless earbuds is the best way to bring the light with you. No matter how much you shake, it's up to you. No matter how much you shake, you will not fall out of your ear. Your everyday earbuds will feel and sound better than ever. I hate other earbuds. They're too expensive, too loud, and easy to leave. These AirPods are great. They're several modes your own earnest mode. When you need to listen to your surroundings so you can jog and make sure that you're with everything and enjoy music and so on. I love the Raycon earbuds. They never fall out of my ear. And you know me, I shake violently. And Raycon earbuds never fall out. That's really what we're selling now this Android. Raycons don't fall out of your ears. A lot of things are going to happen in society in the next months, and it's going to involve people shaking. But one good thing is, as you're stroking out on the floor, one thing you won't lose is your ability to enjoy music.
I should also mention, sorry for the interruption, Jeremy had is in the rain they're good too.
There's rain in the rain.
So if you're
Rain comes in your ears and you enjoy, Toto. Raycons are for 8 hours of playtime and 32-hour battery life. They are priced just right. You get quality over half the price on their premium audio brands. So what do Raycons have need? Raycons have over 48,000 5-star reviews. Right now, listeners can get 15% off their Raycon order at buyraycon.com/Kim. That's buyraycon.com/Kim to save 50% on Raycons. Buyraycon.com/Kim. The best morning routine starts at night. Water. You've heard Rogan talking about their coffee alternatives made with organic ingredients. They rejuvenate you love water.
I love water. It's delicious.
Their new rest blend promotes rest and relaxation, so you wake up rested. Each ingredient in the evening rest blend was added for a purpose. They have ashwagandha to support relaxation, prevent day stress, turkey tail, and reishi to support a healthy immune system, valerian root, and passion flower.
You're doing so good at this, Tim.
Yeah, flavor. Turmeric for exercise induced soreness, cinnamon for antioxidants. We even recommend pairing your evening cup with a bedtime story. The Three Little Pigs, Little Red Riding Hood. But here's the reality, folks. Everyone's doing on this mud water.
Yeah.
I can't leave my house without someone coming up to me and trying to kill me because I won't listen to them about mud water. So I finally started to. I love it. I drink it. Ben drinks it. It's great. I do as well. What do you like?
I like that it's spelled MUTWTR /WTR. It's very, very innovative.
You get it.
I get it. That's essential. I actually honestly.
What's that?
Oh, yeah.
You're not gonna get me about it. Sometimes if I eat like something naughty, like ice cream or some type of treat, I feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
But if I drink milk, I feel rested and relaxed. Who's coming to my head? You have to show them now that you are a powerful consumer. Go out there, don't make a fool of me. Go out there, go to mudwater.com/TIM and get the mud water. Because when it done, it's like, come on, that's it. You're asleep right now. Do you understand? Okay. Sleep. People right now are in a loveless marriage. They've destroyed their relationship with their children. They don't have a job that they find fulfilling. They have no spiritual basis for existence. They're just going through the motions. She's kind of a pot person. Seriously, that's kind of a science experiment, like a potato that people watched it. They're only waiting for the inevitability of the foods they eat and the drinks they consume to ravage their body with cancer, and they die. But they have mud water that's felt good. Mud water. Use the code TIM for $5 off your evening ritual kit. Mud water, your dreams deserve.
Who do you think is the brains, honestly?
Jeffrey Ghislaine? Neither? Well, here's what I mean by that. Ghislaine's father was intelligence. Ghislaine was very schooled in the world of intelligence, right? And, understanding why. Intelligence is the maintenance of relationships, essentially, right? And having leverage over people and how relationships are structured and who has the upper hand at any given time, and that could change, blah, blah, blah. So Ghislaine understood that. Her dad was this media mogul, Robert Maxwell, who was murdered. Her sisters are intact. It's an intelligence family. Epstein was a, kind of, from many people that have met him, sort of, by no means brilliant guy, right? Like, he was not this amazing intellect. However, he had a very good understanding of people, their appetites, their proclivities, their weaknesses, surrounding underage women, surrounding money, where they wanted their money hidden. I'm sure surrounding he seemed to be very good at that. I think the way that they both functioned was a team of people that, ran this very, I think Epstein was the public face of it as a philanthropist, as an investor. I think Ghislaine was just a socialite, but not just a socialite, to the public, just a socialite, but behind the scenes, she was a madam, she was a pimp, she was an access agent, she connected Jeffrey to people that were very powerful in the UK and other places that were friends of her father. And they had an operation that was based on entrapping, blackmailing, gaining leverage over very powerful politicians.
So do you think there was an intelligence connection to all this?
Mossad. It was absolutely a Mossad.
Here with Eric.
It was a Mossad operation, but that doesn't mean the CIA didn't know about it and give it its blessing. No, the CIA ran operations like this in the 80s, in the 90s. These honeypot blackmail operations are not terribly new. They were pioneered by the mafia. I mean, this has been going back for a very long time. You know,
Would like have so many powerful people involved.
oh yeah,
Rich people.
oh yeah, sure. I mean, that's the point. The point is to all of these institutions, whether it's the Council on Foreign Relations or all these things where people think are very like nefarious, whatever it is, Bohemian Grove or Selma, all these things where they really are, they just create a consensus amongst the wealthiest and most powerful people on the planet. And that consensus becomes our foreign policy, our domestic policy, our corporate policy. So it's just creating a consensus. So if you put and whatever they do, whatever bonding activities they do to become closer, or if you put them out in the woods in Monterey, California, or even Grove, or if you put them on an island committing crimes, what this does is this fosters a sense of mutually assured destruction, a sense of homogenous, homogenous ruling class.
I agree. By the way, she mentioned for the record that is wearing a Harvard t-shirt.
Yes, that he was given to by a fat woman who's no longer fat because she had a gastric bypass.
Well, if you were more fat forward,
Yes.
like your friend, you wouldn't even make that comment.
But I mean, I didn't write about this, where it's like it's an intelligence op. They were the face of it. As they moved into the digital world, it became less necessary to have these physical honeycombs.
Let me be clear about this. That the true tragedy of just like Maxwell is that it's just yet another human being losing out to automation.
It's their being replaced by AI. No matter what you think of Jeffrey H. Lane, it's a real issue. Human trafficking needs to involve humans. There's a human cause. This is absolutely the case. Do you think I'm wrong in that I said?
Well, I'm uncomfortable with the intelligent connection.
Why?
Uh,
There's a book about his late father called Israel's Two Personalities.
so
Right,
the
right.
father,
Okay, so the father's in the Messiah.
no, I don't know about the Assad thing.
You don't know about that.
I thought the suicide or whatever.
Yeah, but it's kind of widely believed. He was at the funeral and the dad of his big Israeli premiere. Like, I think it's widely
There's a
accepted.
difference between, for example, if I have a conversation with Putin, am I part of the FSB?
No.
But that's an important, Elon Musk was once at a party with Ghislaine Maxwell at the same party.
Everybody was at a party with just like that.
And so the question is, what is the depth of the connection?
Well, there's a book about it. I mean,
I have a lot of books about a lot of stuff to show.
well, but written by Seymour Hersh. I mean, get the title of the book up, right? What is the title of the book? Written by one of America's greatest Pulitzer Prize winners. Okay. Yeah, but also Hersh wrote something. It might not have been a book, but Seymour Hersh wrote something as well about it. But again, there's an entire book about it.
No,
there's evidence.
No, I know. So, I'm underinformed about this topic. I just have a general.
Where it is a people intelligence.
Yeah, so because it's such a temptation, like whenever I in my mind feel a temptation to see a conspiracy theory or something, I
So what do you think it would be if it wasn't intelligent? What? Let's say it's not the side. We'll back that up. It's also CIA and the Mossad and Saudi intelligence are all like really tight. And MI6, they're like bros. So, and then there's like Iranian intelligence and Russian intelligence and Syrian intelligence, and they're like cool. They're like freaking good.
So this is a view of the world with the intelligence organization ultra competent.
That's their all.
Okay, so this is my view. They're not ultra competent.
Not all of them.
They're exceptionally well funded. They're large organizations that have a lot of people pushing paper, and they are pretty effective at a lot of things. But there's a decent amount that A students of the world, I believe.
Okay, let's look at these. And you don't have to be an A student to kill someone. True, if you're a C student and you're willing to put a gun in someone's mouth, it's actually probably just as good as having an A. say it is. It's not an intelligence blackmail operation. What would you say that it could be?
I would say it's one charismatic person, Epstein, that was and committed things.
But that's a great. Everyone listens. You sound
That's a show, which is why I enjoy doing it.
no,
I'm a little bit playing devil's advocate here, so I don't fully believe this, but there's a sense where I feel that there's an important distinction to draw. Jeffrey Epstein being a complete manufactured manifestation of an intelligence agency versus as one charismatic evil person becomes more and more successful individualist. Like on an individual level, you start meeting powerful people, and then intelligence has
I'm not saying that it's not necessarily the entire intelligence agency, right? These intelligence agencies are bureaucracies, but they do have within them fiefdoms and factions of power. You have bad actors, you have people that are outside of the agency officially, that have all the skills, that know all the people. So I think the entire CIA behind any of these things, right? But there are groups of people. All the intelligence agencies do is they work for billionaires, essentially. They work for American corporate interests. That's what the CIA does. They oversee as an American corporate works for wealth. They essentially are the information, the muscle, and where we cannot do things overtly with our military and with U.S. policy and get things passed through Congress, you have a shadow organization that's able to do that. That's not terribly controversial, right? I mean, that's pretty well known. If you look at all the coups, in other countries that are provable, coups maybe in this country,
what's important for me to understand with this is I don't think it's controversial. The question is the scale at which, how many people are involved, how much of it is at the core of what the CIA does versus just a few people.
Well, the core of what the CIA does probably is largely, they gather a lot of information out. The core of any business, right? So if you look at Walmart, the core of Walmart is you going in and buying stocks and someone taking your money, But then there's a group of people in Walmart making decisions and charting the direction of the company and what they're going to do for the next 5 to 10 years. So I think the core of these institutions is relatively benign, but there's, again, power factions within them. They're not all homogenous, right? There's people in the CIA that had no idea what was going on. There's people that would be disgusted by it. There's people that would be repulsed by it. There's no getting around this fact. Blackmail has been an essential part of the recruitment of agents. It's been an essential part of maintaining relationships with people. This is how intelligent people have often found leverage to gain information.
Yeah,
That is true.
that's very true. My question is, how is that increasing or decreasing the amount of that data? So ultimately, my question is about whenever you think intelligence is running the most powerful people in the world, that blackmail, everything controlled by certain very powerful figures, it's very naturally lead to a cynicism about the future of the world that deeply troubles them. So if I want to land an optimism with people,
Have you tried drugs?
not at all.
Drugs are very good.
Optimism.
They make you feel a way that reality might not.
No, I don't think so. I think drugs.
I'm not saying everything's cynical. I'm not saying everybody's controlled. What I am saying is that one cannot bury their head in the sand when there is an island and a dance in New York City that has recording equipment. You have a guy who was let off the first time, the very sweetheart kid, who's paddling around with the president. It's the definition of this looks bad.
But I would argue we need to gaze into the abyss because it's back in the deal. I would argue all these studies, the Jeffrey Epstein case,
That's the devil's advocate.
so this is the burden of the great.
That's the QAnon.
Or that's
That's the
also
QAnon.
crazy about this. It would
Alex is crazy.
I love how it's nuts. When you constantly analyze this stuff, that's what happens. Is red. Understood. And so if you don't see any red, that's also not. Look at it. You go, why don't you just there's definitely balance right there. It seems unsupported that this is one evil person, another evil person together, no larger the network over time. Right. And a lot of it is parties and handshakes to each other, politicians. I'm sure. So, one thing that seems to be the case, because I've known people that interact with Jeffrey Epstein, he seems to completely deluded them. Like the charisma is there, and it doesn't have to do with money or women. At the core level, it has to do straight up in the room together. Charisma. Yeah, and so I just believe that one charismatic guy can do a lot of damage in this world without first sort of being manufactured as a strategic deployment to the United States by some intelligence agency. Now, I've interacted with more and more powerful people. He probably got some phone calls and probably had some meetings. I don't even think I would say that he was deployed. I don't believe that the way these agencies necessarily operate is that we're thinking of them as, custodians of national interests, which I don't think they are, right? I think they are kind of work for hire organizations where there's certain people in those countries that have a lot of money, that have an idea about the way things should be run, that, kind of use these agencies. I don't necessarily think that, all of these agencies all the time are focused on betterment of any one particular agency. I think there's a certain group of people that have enough money and enough power that use these agencies as ways to sustain that position in society. So I think Epstein, whether it was in Tel Aviv or in London or in Manhattan, was having conversations with these people whose loyalty is really not to any particular country, but it's to their own interests. I just have to say that I am really troubled on a personal level that there's a lot of people I respect that when they were in the room with Jeffrey Epstein were not able to see not having integrity. No, they're looking at pussy. This is the thing. Maybe I'm built different. It's not like a Ford thing or something. Built up. I do rock. I just think you can't money to destroy your integrity. When I see that not being the case with Jeffrey Epstein, people that have spoken with Jeffrey Epstein, that really troubles me. That his charisma and manipulation revealed the people who are like you. Now, I could be naive because you could snap and Ben could be the next Ghislaine Maxwell. And here I am doing this virtual podcast and I'm even a fan. So maybe it's your charisma that's going to be an island. No, he's an island and it's going to be the largest piece of real estate in Manhattan. Look at this, as just this independent thing. You look at, well, why did Les Rex gift Jeffrey Epstein these massive, insanely desirable pieces of real estate? One in New York City, right? What is the connection there? That connection is not. When people have spoken about that's really shady. That's just a shady connection, right? So you have this guy who is a well-established in traffic, and you have his biggest benefactor, financially not questioned at all. Out this, I mean, you can be as averse to conspiracy. Sometimes, unfortunately, they just become the news. And this has kind of become the news.
But I think your thing. I think your thing's valid. Movement, which is psychotic minds and melted. But they got a few nuggets of truth. And then they concocted Disney-esque childish stories about good and evil. Because one everything in life has clarity and certitude of religion. And they created this thing where everyone in Hollywood's evil and everyone's a pedophile. And then dead people are going to come back and JFK Jr. was a very religious movement. That's what happens with movements that was everywhere, and they're unable to differentiate facts from fiction.
And then on the other side, there's similar things. The scientific community has really been disappointing to me about the little Americans. They dismiss everything. But they dismiss basically everything as a conspiracy theory that's not like very narrowly defined public policy.
I watched your interview with Pfizer, the big guy who owns a diner. And I like it how that interview was that. And he's a doctor. He's Italian. Yeah, even though he's the CEO of Pfizer, he literally owns a story where he brings out smiles and he yells at his wife and their nephews who work at the diner. But that's a reality.
I'm guessing his son's is a fan of yours because his son mentioned the podcast. He likes this podcast, my podcast. I'm guessing
They're a fan of me. I mean, very smart people listen to you. That doesn't mean they come over to me.
Yeah,
They should.
yeah, let's do the next step.
My answer is
too tough for him. I say stay in there. I'm not going to let anybody see you. That wants to get out. But I pour whiskey on him and give him cigarette smoke. And the horse. Get out. I'm too tough for him. I say stay down. You want to mess me up? You want to screw up the works? You want to blow my book sales in Europe? There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too clever. I only let him out at night sometimes, when everybody's asleep. I say, Aaron's always sad. Then I put him back, but he's sinking a little in there. You haven't quite let him die. Together like that, with our secret pact, and it's nice enough to make a man weep, but I don't weep. Do you?
That's a great poem. I love that.
It's an encouragement to let your
Bluebird out.
yeah. It's a little bit of love.
I mean, I find this one.
I'm almost scared.
Are you a Bukowski fan?
Yeah.
Badass bitch. Bad attitude. Nails done. Hair done. Ass too. Your baby daddy fucking me and sucking me. He don't answer you, bitch. That's because of me.
Author of this masterpiece.
Done my happy.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for having me. Let's straighten everyone.
Because by that, the following is a conversation from Malice. On this, the Let's Frequent podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, here's my 2021 conversation with the one and only Mr. Michael Malice.
Привет, товарищ. С Новым годом! С Новым годом. Dostoevsky wrote in The Idiot, my favorite of his books, through the main character, Prince Mishkin, that beauty will save the world. Красота спасет мир. These words, seemingly naive and ultimately, at least to me, profound. What do they mean to you? Beauty will save the world. Naive? Really? The following is a conversation with Yaron Brook and Yoram Hazony. This is Yaron's third time on this podcast, and Yoram's first time. Yaron Brook, the Breakfast philosopher, chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, host of the Yaron Brook Show, and co-author of Free Market Revolution and Equal is Unfair. Yoram Hazony is a national conservatism thinker, chairman of the Edmund Burke Foundation that hosted the National Conservatism Conference. He's also the host of the NatCon Talk and author of The Virtue of Nationalism and an upcoming book called Conservatism, A Rediscovery. Allow me to say a few words. I attended the excellent debate between the two of you yesterday at UT Austin. The debate was between ideas of conservatism. So, Yaron, you say that history...
So I view Marx as one more collectivist in a whole string of collectivists, and I think the Bismarckian response, which Bismarck, I know less about Disraeli, so I'll focus on Bismarck. I mean, Bismarck is really responding to political pressures from the left, and he's responding to the rise of communism, socialism. But what Bismarck is doing, he's putting something alternative. He's presenting an alternative standard by which should method the and what he's replacing it is the state. Saying proletariat with the state. And that has exactly the same problems. That is, first, it requires sacrificing some to others, which is what the welfare state basically legitimizes. It places the state above all, so the state now becomes, I think, the biggest evil of Bismarck, and I definitely view him as a negative force in history, is public education. I mean, the Germans really dig in on public education and really develop it, and really the American model of public education is copying the German, the Prussian Bismarckian public education.
Speak to that real quick, why the public education is such a root of moral evil for you.
Well, because it now says that there's one standard, and that standard is determined by government, by bureaucracy, by whatever the government deems is in the national interest. And Bismarck's very explicit about this. He's training the workers of the future. They need to catch up, and with England and other places, they need to train the workers. And there's going to be he's going to train some people to be the managerial class, he's going to train other people to be, and he decides, right? The government, the bureaucracy is going to decide who's who and where they go. There's no individual choice. There's no individual showing an ability to break out of what the government has decided is their little box. There's very little freedom. There's very little, ultimately there's very little competition. There's very little innovation. And this is the problem we have today in American education, which we can get to, is there's no competition and no innovation. We have one standard fit all conflict. To be conflict. Not about, nobody cares about that. It's about political agendas, right? It's about what my group wants to be taught and what that group wants to be taught, rather than actually discovering how do we get kids. We don't know how to get. There's a political agenda about not teaching phonics. So a lot of schools don't teach phonics, even though the kids will never learn how to read properly. So I don't believe education. I think it's product students, and we know how to deliver phonics efficiently at a really, really low price, at a really, really low market to do.
Your fundamental criticism is education to further aims.
Well, or whatever the aims is. I mean, think about the conservative today critique of American educational system. Right? It's dominated by the left. Yeah. What did you expect? Right? If you leave it up to the state to fund, they're going to fund the things that promote state growth and state intervention, and the left is better at that. It has been better at that than the right, and they now dominate educational institutions. But look, if we go back to Bismarck, my problem is placing the state above the individual. So if communism places the class above the individual, what matters is class, individuals are nothing, they're cogs in the machine. Bismarck, certainly the German tradition, much more than the British tradition or the American tradition, the German tradition is to place the state above the individual. I think that's equally evil, and the outcome is fascism, and the outcome is the same. The outcome is the deaths of tens of millions of people when taken to its ultimate conclusion. Just like socialism, the ultimate conclusion of it is communism, nationalism in that form, kind of the Bismarckian form, the ultimate conclusion is Nazism or something like that. Because you don't care about the individual. The individual doesn't matter. I think this is one of the differences in the Anglo-American tradition, where the Anglo-American tradition, even the conservatives, have always acknowledged, and it goes back to
especially the conservatives.
Yes,
the conservatives were there first.
They acknowledged. Well, you've defined conservatives to include all the good thinkers of the distant past, and they're all good thinkers. We agree on that.
I'm defining conservatism the way that Burke does. Look, this is a very simple observation. Burke thinks, when you open Burke and you actually read him, he starts naming all these people who he's defending. And it's bizarre. I'm sorry, it's just intellectual sloppiness for people to be publishing books called Burke, the first conservative, the founding conservative, this is nonstop. It's a view that says Burke reacts to the French Revolution, so conservatism has no prior tradition. It's just reacting to the French Revolution, and this is just absurd.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
on conservatism? Are there any conservatives that are embracing of revolutions? So are they ultimately against the concept of revolution?
Yes, Burke himself embraces the Polish Revolution, which takes place almost exactly at the same revolution. And the argument, because there's a common mistake, is assuming that Burke and conservative thinkers are always in favor of slow change. I think that's also just factually mistaken. Burke is against the French Revolution because he thinks that there are actually tried and true things that work for human flourishing, and freedom included as a very important part of human flourishing. He, like many others, takes the English Constitution to be a model of something that works. So it has a king, it has various other things that maybe your own will say, well, that's a mistake, but still, for centuries, it's the leader in many things that I think we can easily agree are human flourishing. And Burke says, look, what's wrong with the French Revolution? What's wrong with the French Revolution is that they have a system that has all sorts of problems, but they could be repairing it. And instead, what they're doing by overthrowing everything is they're moving away from what we know is good for human beings. Then he looks at the Polish Revolution, and he says the Poles do the opposite. The Poles have a non-functioning traditional constitution. It's too democratic. It's impossible to get to raise armies and to defend the country because of the fact that every nobleman has a veto.
So the Polish Revolution moves in the direction of the British Constitution. They repaired the Constitution through a rapid revolution. They install a king along a model that looks a lot like Britain, and Burke supports this. He says that this is a good revolution. So it's not the quickly make a change in order to save yourself. That's not what conservatives are objecting to. What they're objecting to is instead of looking at experience in order to try to make a slow or quick improvement, a measured improvement to achieve a particular goal, instead of doing that, you say, look, the whole thing has been wrong, and what we've really got to do is annihilate a certain part of the population and then make completely new laws and a completely new theory. That's what he's objecting to. That's the French Revolution, and that then becomes the model for communist revolutions.
And for me, the French Revolution is clearly really evil and wrong, but it's not that it was a revolution. It's not that it tried to change everything. I mean, let's remember what was going on in France at the time. People were starving, and the monarchy in particular was completely detached from the suffering of the people, and something needed to change. The unfortunate thing is that the change was motivated by an egalitarian philosophy, not egalitarian in the sense that I think the founding fathers talked about it, but egalitarian in the sense of real equality of outcome, motivated by a philosophy, by Rousseau's philosophy. And inevitably, like, you could tell that the ideas were going to lead to this, to massive destruction and death and the annihilation of a class. You can't, annihilation is never an option. That is, it's not true that a good revolution never leads to mass death of just whole groups of people. Good revolution is about the sanctity of the individual. It's about preservation of liberty of the individual. And again, that goes back to, and Rousseau denies really that in civilization there is a value and a thing called the individual.
I think this is a good place to have this discussion. The founding fathers of the United States, are they individualists or are they conservatives? So in this particular revolution that founded this country, the core of which is some fascinating, some powerful ideas, were those founding fathers' ideas coming from a place of conservatism, or did they put primary value into the freedom, the power of the individual? What do you think?
There were both. I mean, this is something that's a little bit difficult sometimes for Americans. I mean, even very educated Americans, they talk about the founding fathers as though it's kind of like this collective, entity with a single brain and a single value system. But I think at the time that's not the way not the way any of them saw it. So roughly there's two camps, and they map onto the rationalist versus traditionalist empiricist dichotomy that I proposed earlier. And so on the one hand, you have real revolutionaries like Jefferson and Paine. These are the people who Burke was writing against. These are the people who supported the French Revolution.
So when you say real, so when you say Paine, you're referring to bad guy. Like, this is a problem.
These are people who will say, history up until has been, with Descartes, but applied to politics. History up until now has been, just a story of ugliness, foolishness, stupidity, and evil. If you apply reason, we'll all come to the same conclusion. And he writes a book called The Age of Reason, and The Age of Reason is a manifesto for here is the answer to political and moral problems throughout history. We have the answers. And it's in the same school as Rousseau's social... No, you don't like that?
Not at all.
Oh, I thought it was...
I think they're the opposite.
Okay, so let me...
Just to throw in a quick question on Jefferson and Paine. Do you think America would exist without those two figures? So, like, how important is spice in the flavor of the dish you're making?
I don't want to try to run the counterfactual. I don't have confidence that I know the answer to the question.
But it's so much fun.
I'm going to offer something that I think is more fun. More fun than the counterfactual is America had two revolutions, not one. Okay? At first, there's a revolution that is strongly spiced with And then there's a 10-year period after the Declaration of Independence. There's a 10-year period under which America has a constitution, its first constitution, which today they call the Articles of the Confederation. But there's a constitution from 1777. And that constitution is based on, in a lot of ways, on the hottest new ideas. It has, instead of the traditional British system with a division of powers between, an executive and a bicameral legislature, instead of that traditional model, which most of the states, their governments, instead of that, they say, no, we're going to have one elected body. Okay, and that body, that Congress, it's going to be the executive. It's going to be the legislative. It's going to be everything, and it's going to run as a big committee. These are the ideas of the French Revolution. You get to actually see them implemented in Pennsylvania, in the Pennsylvania Constitution, and then later in the National Assembly in France. It's a disaster. The thing doesn't work. It's completely made up. It's not based on any kind of, it's neither based on historical experience, nor is it based on historical custom, what people are used to. And what they succeed in creating with this first constitution is it's wonderfully rational, but it's a complete disaster. It doesn't allow the raising of taxes. It doesn't allow the mustering of troops. It doesn't allow giving orders to soldiers to fight a war. And if that had continued, to be the American Constitution, America never would have been an independent country. There, I'm willing to do that counterfactual. What happens during those years, where Washington and Jay and Knox and Hamilton and Morris, there's like this group of conservatives. They're mostly soldiers and lawyers. Other than Washington, most of them are from northern cities, and this group is much more conservative than the Tom Paine and Jefferson school. Some historians call them the Nationalist Party. Historically, they give up the word nationalism and they call themselves the Federalist Nationalist Party. What does that mean? It means, on the one hand, that their goal is to create an independent nation, independent from Britain, but on the other hand, they believe that they already have national legal traditions, the common law, the forms of government that have been imported from Britain, and of course Christianity, which they consider to be part of their inheritance. This Federalist Party is the conservative party. These are people who are extremely close in ideas to Burke. And these are people who wrote the Constitution of the United States, the second Constitution, the second revolution, 1787. When Washington reads the establishment of the Constitution, which maybe legally it wasn't even legal under the old Constitution, but it was democratic. And what it did is it said, we're going to take what we know about English government, what we've learned by applying English government, a national government, a unified national government that's going to muster power in its hands, enough power to be able to do things like fighting wars to defend a unified people. Those are conservatives. Now, it's reasonable to say, no king, so how conservative could they be? But I think that's a reasonable question. But don't forget that the American colonies, the English colonies in America, by that point had been around for 150 years. They had written constitutions. They had already adapted, for an entire century, adapted the English Constitution to the local conditions where there's no aristocracy, there's no king. I think you can see that as a positive thing. On the other hand, they have slavery. That's an innovation. That's not English. So it's a little bit different from the English Constitution. But those men are conservatives. They make the minimum they need to the English Constitution, and they largely replicate it, which is why the Jeffersonians hated them so much. They called them apostates. They say they've betrayed equality and liberty and fraternity by adopting an English-style constitution.
So I would imagine, Yaron, you would put emphasis on the success of the idea of finding this country elsewhere, at the freedom of the individual. So the tradition of the British Empire.
I mean, the one thing I agree with you on is the fact that, yes, the founding fathers are not a monolith. I mean, they argued, they debated, they disagreed, they wrote against each other. I mean, decades didn't even speak to each other. They did make up. and had a fascinating relationship after.
You and I are.
There you go.
It's like the founding fathers.
There's massive debate and discussion, but I don't agree with the characterization of Paine and Jefferson. I don't think it's just to call them rationalists, because I don't think history, the problems in history, and remember this century, coming out of 100 years earlier, some of the bloodiest wars in history were happening in Europe, many of them over religion. They had seen what was going on in France and other countries where people were starving, and where kings were frolicking in palaces in spite of that. They were very aware of the relative freedom that the British tradition had given. Knew that, they understood that, and I think they were building on that. They were taking the observations of the past, trying to come up with a more perfect system. And I think they did. In that sense, I'm a huge fan of Jefferson. There are two things that I think are unfortunate about Jefferson. One is that he continued to hold slaves, which is very unfortunate. And the second is his early support for the French Revolution, which I think is a massive mistake. And I would be surprised if he regretted it later in life, given the consequences. But, they were trying to devise principles by which they could establish a new state. And yes, there was pushback by some, and there was disagreement, and the Constitution in the end is to some extent a form of compromise. It's still one of the great documents of all of human history, political documents, the Constitution. Although I think it's inferior to the Declaration. I'm a huge fan of the Declaration. I think one of the mistakes the conservatives makes, one of the mistakes the Supreme Court makes and American judiciary makes, is assuming the two documents are separate. I think Lincoln is absolutely right. You can't understand the Constitution without understanding the Declaration. The Declaration would set the context, it sets everything up for the Constitution. Individual rights are the key concept there. And one of the challenges was that some of the compromises, and compromises not necessarily between groups, but compromises that even Jefferson made and others made regarding individual rights, set America on a path that we're suffering from today. I mentioned three last night. One was slavery. Obviously, that was a horrific compromise, one that Americans had paid for with the Civil War. 600,000 young men died because of it. But the suffering of black slaves for all those years. But then the whole issue of racial tensions in this country for a century, really, the consequences. Who knows what the counterfactual is in America? If there's a civil war right at the founding, right? Because there would have been a war no matter what. But if it had happened in the late 18th century, early 19th century, rather than waiting till 1860s. But then, second was Jefferson's embrace of public education, his founding of the University of Virginia, which I think is a great tragedy, and which nobody agrees with me on. So that's one of the areas where I'm pretty radical. And then they embrace, both by Jefferson and by Hamilton, for different reasons, but an embrace by both of them of government role in the economy. And I do finance, so I know a little bit about finance. And the debate between Jefferson and Hamilton about banking is fascinating. But at the end of the day, both wanted a role for government in banking. They both didn't trust. Jefferson didn't trust big financial interests. Hamilton wanted to capture some of those financial interests in the state. And as a consequence, we set America on a path where, in my view, regulation always needs to never a case where regulation decreases. And we started out with a regulatory body around banks and a recognition that it was okay to regulate the economy. So once we get into the late 19th century, it's fine to regulate the railroads, it's fine to pass antitrust laws, it's fine to then continue on the path of where we are today, which is heavy, massive, every aspect of our economy and really in every aspect of our life because of education. So I think the country was founded on certain mistakes. We haven't been willing to question those mistakes in the sense that we've only moved in the opposite direction. And now America has become, whereas I think it was founded on the idea of the primacy of the individual, the sanctity. The idea, even if not fully implemented, I think now that it really is an advocate out there for liberalism in politics, for true freedom in politics.
Get to individualism. Let me ask the Beatles and Rolling Stones question about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. What is, well, because it's like which document, Beatles or Rolling, which document is more important? So
It's obviously the Beatles.
okay, it's
Question.
is there even a question? But let me then even zoom in further and ask you to pick your favorite song. So, what ideas in the Constitution or the Declaration do you think are the most important to the success of the United States of America?
I'll answer the question, but before answering the question, I want to register a dissent from your own.
Is it the public education? Is it which?
No. Actually, we're not so far apart on public education. I'm actually kind of surprised that you're so anti-Bismarck, because his public school system, with his national public school system, was created for the church. It was the church that ran the schools before then. And okay, so that's a different.
I'm almost sticking to the church. I know. Any other city, but not when the alternative is the nation.
Right.
I'd rather see free educational system. Freedom is the nation.
Okay, so I want to register a dissent about Lincoln. Look, an important figure and a great man, and he was presiding over a country which at that point was pretty Jeffersonian in terms of its self-perception. He said what he needed to say. I'm not going to criticize, but I don't accept the idea that the Declaration of Independence starts one revolution, is of a piece the second Constitution, the Constitution of 1787, the Nationalist Constitution, which is effectively a counter-revolution. What happens is there is a revolution. It's based on certain principles. There are a lot, not exactly, but in many ways resemble the later ideas of the French Revolution. And what the Federalist Party does, the Nationalist Conservative Party does, a counter-revolution to reinstate the Old English Constitution. So these documents are, if you're willing to accept the evidence of history, they are in many respects contrary to one another. And so if I'm asked what's the most important values that are handed down by these documents, I don't have an objection to life, liberty, and property, all of which are really important things. I do have an objection to the pompous overreach of these are self-evident, which is absurd. They can't be self-evident. If they were self-evident, then somebody would have come up with them, like 2,000 years before. It's not self-evident, and so that's damaging. I like the conservative preamble of the Constitution, which describes the purposes of the national government that's being established. There are seven purposes: a more perfect union, which is the principle of justice, domestic peace, common defense, the general welfare, which is the welfare of the public, not there is such a thing as a general welfare, liberty, which is absolutely crucial, and posterity, that government is and grow this independent nation, and not only to guarantee rights no matter what happens.
But you don't like we hold these truths to be self-evident. So you're definitely a Beatles guy. You don't want the pompous. You don't need that revolutionary.
I think that expression, self-evident truths, it does tremendous damage, because it instead of a moderate skepticism, which says we may not know everything, it says, look, we know everything. Here it is. Here's what we know. We know.
We don't know everything.
We
think.
So I'll agree with you all. I don't like self-evident. I don't like self-evident because he's absolutely right. It's not self-evident. These are massive achievements. These are massive. Like thinking, studying history, of understanding human nature, of deriving a truth from 3,000 years of historical knowledge and a better understanding of human nature and the capacity is using reason in some ways better than any human beings have. I mean, the Founding Fathers, giants historically, in my view, because they came up with these. You think they're truths, but they're certainly not self-evident. I mean, if they were, your arm is right. They would have discovered them thousands of years earlier, or everybody would accept them, right? I mean, how many people today think that what they say in that document is true. Pretty much, 5 people. I don't know. It's very.
your criticism of modern society.
It's very, very few people recognize this. It was self-evident. Bam! Everybody would have become, would have accepted revolution as it. A lot of work has to go into understanding and describing and convincing people about this truth. But I completely disagree with you all about this idea, or I'll voice my dissent.
Register your official dissent.
About A through different revolution, and B the domestic similar.
You know that Jefferson and Paine were in France.
Oh, I know,
running
I know.
running a different
I know,
revolution.
but they were constantly. I mean, they would Madison. There was
No,
a lot of
I know. Jefferson pulled his hair out because Madison has come under the influence of nationalists, and he can't believe it.
The reality is the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution is vast, and it is a philosophical difference, and it's a difference that expressed, I think, between the differences. Yoram, in his writings, lumps Rousseau with Locke, Hare, and with others, and I think that's wrong. I think Rousseau is an anti-Enlightenment figure. Rousseau is in many respects harkening back to a past, an ancient past, and I think a completely distorted view of human nature. He rejects reason. I mean, Rousseau is on the premise that reason is the end of humanity. Reason is the destruction of humanity. Reason is how we get civilization. Civilization is awful.
I don't disagree. We're only talking about that's when I say we're talking about the social.
Yeah, but the concept he takes clarity between others, but he takes it in a completely different direction, and we agree social contract is a bad idea. But you can't have a contract that you don't actually voluntarily accept. But Rousseau is the French Revolution. Rousseau is about destruction and mayhem and chaos and anarchy. He is the spirit behind the French Revolution. I think the American Revolution is a complete rejection of Rousseau. I think Jefferson is a complete rejection of Rousseau. I don't think Jefferson is a fan of Rousseau. He is a Voltaire. He certainly is a Montesquieu. If you look at any Federalist Papers, the intellectual most cited in the Federalist Papers, I think, just the number of times it's cited, is Montesquieu. So I think that the American Revolution is an individualistic revolution. It is a revolution about the rights of the individual. The French Revolution is a negation of the rights of the individual. It's a collectivistic revolution. It's not quite the Marxist revolution of the proletarian, but it's defining people in classes, and it's rebellion against classes. Yeah, kill them all, right? Off with their heads. And it's Asian about egalitarianism in the sense of equality of outcome, not in the sense of equality before the law, or equality of rights, which is the Jeffersonian sense. So I think it's wrong to lump Jefferson in to the fraternity, egalitarian notion of the French, which is far more similar to what ultimately became socialism and Marxism, or in kind of that tradition. It's anti-individualistic, the French Revolution is, whereas the American Revolution, the first one, is individualistic. It's all about individual rights. And while certain phrases in the Declaration of Independence that I don't agree with, beautifully written and the magnificent documents, it's hard for me to say I don't agree. Who am I? Right? These were giants. Self-evident is one of them. I'm not particularly crazy about endowed by the Creator. But I like the fact that it's creator and not God, or not a specific creator, but just kind of a general thing. But putting those two dashes aside, it's the greatest political document in all of human history, by far. Nothing comes close. It is a document that identifies the core principles of political truism, of truth. That is, the role of government is to preserve and to protect these rights, these inalienable rights. And that is so crucial. These rights are inalienable. That is, a majority can't vote them out. Revelation can't vote them out. This is what is required. The right, that is, the sanction, the freedom, act on your own behalf, act based on your own judgment. As long as you're not, interfering with other people's rights, you are free to do so. That is such a profound truth, and that to me is the essence of political philosophy. That's the beginning, and it's based on just to not to fall into. I'm going to say it's a rationalist. It's based on a whole history of what happens when we negate that. It's based on looking at England and seeing to the extent that they practiced a respect for individual liberty, property, of freedom. Good things happen. So let's take that all the way. Let's not compromise on that. Let's be consistent with the good and reject the bad. And when England goes away, distance itself from the rights of man, the idea of a right to property and so on, bad things happen. And let's go all in. And I'm all in on the right to life, liberty, property, and pursuit of happiness. And I think the idea of pursuit of happiness is profound because it's a moral statement. It's a statement that says that sanctions and says that ultimately people should be allowed to make their own judgments and live their lives as they see fit based on how they happiness. They might be right, they might be wrong, but we're not going to dictate what happiness entails and dictate to people how they should live their lives. Let them figure that out. So it has this self-interested moral code kind of embedded in it. So I think it's a beautiful statement. So I think the Declaration is key. And I think there was an experiment, and the experiment was proposed in that period of before the Constitution, where the experiment was let's let the states, let's have a kind of a loose confederation. Let's let the states experiment with setting up their own constitutions and roll the government, and we won't have any kind of unity. And I think what they realized, and I think even Jefferson, is that was not workable because many of the states were starting to significantly violate rights. There was nothing to unify, there was nothing to really protect. The vision of the Declaration, you needed to establish a nation, which is what the Constitution does, it establishes a nation. But the purpose of that was to put everybody under one set of laws that protected rights. The focus was still on the protection of rights, and I agree with 6 of the 7 of the principles, right? The common welfare, the general body, right? I think in the way the founders understood it, I think I probably agree. But it's such an ambiguous. I'm sure you don't. Maybe I don't. But just in the general welfare. Well, the idea that part of the role of government is to secure the general welfare is something. It's something.
This is something we didn't get to it, but they really should have. Is the question of whether there is such a thing as a common good or a public interest or a national interest or a general welfare. Do these words, do these terms mean anything other than the good of all of the individuals in the country? That's it. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's right. So that's why. So I object to it because I think it's too easy to interpret it as. So I interpret it as, well, it's good for the general, a group, a common, the people are just a collection of individuals. It's good for the individual. It's good for the common one. And I understand that's something that is hard for people to grasp and not the common understanding. So I would have skipped the general welfare in order to avoid the fact that now the general welfare includes the government telling you what gender you should be assigned. So I would have wanted to skip that completely. So I think the Constitution is completely consistent with the Declaration, with a few exceptions. The general welfare, perfection is a difficult thing to find, particularly for me, right, politically. But it's a magnificent document. The Constitution, it doesn't quite rise to the level, I think, of the Declaration, but it's a magnificent document because, and this is the difference, I think, between the English Constitution. Here's what I see. The difference is that the Constitution is written in the context of why do we have a separation of powers? We have a separation of powers in order to make sure that the government only does what the government is supposed to do. And what is the government supposed to do? Well, fundamentally, it's supposed to protect rights. I mean, all of those 7, at least 6 of the 7, are about protecting rights. They're about protecting us from foreign invaders. They're about protecting peace in the country. They're about preserving this protection of rights. And why do we have this separation? So that we make sure that no one of those entities, the executive, legislature, judicial, can violate rights, because there's always somebody in the legal position. There's always somebody with veto power. But there's a purpose, and that purpose is clearly signified and characterized, and that's why I think the Bill of Rights was written in order to add to the clarification of what exactly we mean. What is the purpose? The purpose is to preserve rights, and that's why we need to elaborate with those rights. And Madison's objection to the Bill of Rights was to say not that he objected to having protection of rights, but to listing them because he was worried that other rights that were not listed would not be, and his worry was completed because it's exactly what's happened. It's like the only reason we have free speech in America is we've got it in writing as a First Amendment. If we didn't have it in writing, it would have been gone a long time ago. And the reason we don't have, for example, the freedom to negotiate a contract, independent government regulation is that was not listed as a right in the bill, even though I think it's clearly covered under the Constitution. So there was a massive mistake done in the Bill of Rights. They tried to cover it as the Ninth Amendment, but it never really stuck. This idea that non-enumerated rights that is still in place. So I don't see this as a second revolution. I think it's a fix to a flaw that happened. It's a fix that allowed expansion of right to all states by creating a national mechanism to protect those rights, and that's what ultimately led to slavery going away. Under the initial agreement, slavery means there in perpetuity because states were sovereign in a way that under the new Constitution they were not. And in a sense, the Constitution sets in motion the Declaration, and then the Constitution sets in motion the civil war has to happen because at the end of the day, you cannot have some states with offensive violation of rights. What's more than violation of rights than slavery, and some states that recognize it's not. It inevitably leads to.
Your Honor was just saying that, other than the general welfare, these principles are about individual liberties. I just don't think you can read it that way. The first stated purpose of the Constitution of 1787 is in order to form a more perfect union. A more perfect union, it's describing a characteristic of the whole. It is not a characteristic of any individual. If you look at how the individuals are doing, you don't know whether their union is more or less perfect. So what they're doing is they're looking at the condition in which, in order to be able to fight the Battle of Yorktown, they have to. So somebody has to write a personal check in order to be able to move armies. Is a more cohesive union. It's the ability to get all of these different individuals to do one focused thing when it's necessary to do it.
Well, it's more than that, right? So I agree with that. But for what purpose? That is, and this is why it's so hard with these. There's a context of thinking that they can't write everything down, right? Which is sad because I wish they had. What's the purpose of a more perfect union? The purpose of the more perfect union is to preserve the liberty of the individuals within that union. And how because if you look, what's the rest? So what is the common defense? The common defense is to protect us from foreign invaders who would now disrupt what the rest of the Constitution is all about. All of the Constitution is written in a way as to preserve, find ways to limit the ability of government to violate the rights of people. That the beauty of this Constitution, again, its connection to the Declaration and tradition, right? What came before it? What came before it was a document which they all respected. Right? Set the Constitution. And now the Union is there in order to provide the common defense. Great. Because we know that foreign invaders can violate our rights. That's what war is about. To protect us from that's based on law, the rule of law, and again, individual liberty. So, to me, when you read the Founders, when you read the Federalist Papers, when you read what they wrote, what they're trying to do is figure out the right kind of political system, the right kind of structure to be able to preserve. And not all of them had a perfect understanding what those entailed, but they were all, even the conservatives, all generally in agreement about what's an individual liberty. Of course, because almost all of these rights are traditional English rights. They exist in the English Bill of Rights, in the English Petition of Right. They exist, of course. All of these are what they're trying to do is perfect that. They're trying to take the British system and perfect it. And but
you bring out that they want to be like England and that they want to have an independent nation. An independent independent nation is not a collection of individual liberties. An independent nation, the first sentence of the Declaration of Independence, is the declaration that there is a collective right. We as a people are breaking the bonds with other people, and we're going to take our place, our equal station among the nations of the earth.
For what purpose? The purpose is to protect individual rights. And there's no collective right.
No, your argument is good. Certainly, you're not allowing the possibility that there could be great and deep men that you and I both admire who wanted independence of their nation, not because that would give individuals liberty, but because the independence of their nation was themselves.
Really disagree. Because I don't think the defense of the nation is good in of itself. Because it's and this is what
they think it was.
I don't think they did, and this is why they tried so hard not to break England, and why many of them struggled, really struggled with having a revolution, because England was pretty good. Right? England was the best, and this is where we should get to the universality of this, because I think England was the best, and universally and absolutely was the best system out there. And what they struggled to break from England because they didn't view the value of having a nation as the primary. But what they identified in England is certain flaws in the system that created situations in which their rights were being violated. So they figured that our only option in order to secure these rights is to break away from England and secure a nation. Now, I am not an anarchist, as
Michael Mouse does.
because we've discussed it. I believe you need nations. You need nations to secure those rights. That is, the rights are not, you can't secure those rights without having a nation. But the nation is just a means to an end. The end is the rights, and I think that's how the founders understood it, and that's why they created this kind of country.
I think this is a good place to ask about common welfare and cohesion. Let me say what John Donne wrote, that, quote, "Man is an island entitled to itself, of the continent and the part of pain." It went on, "Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved with mankind, and therefore never sentinel bell tolls. It tolls for thee." So, let's talk about individualism and cohesion. Not just at the political level, but at a philosophical level, the human condition. What is central? What is the role of other humans in our lives? What's the importance of cohesion? This is something you've talked about. So, you're on that the beauty of the founding documents is that they create a cohesive union that protects the individual freedoms. But you have spoken about the value of the union, the common welfare, the cohesion in itself. So can you maybe elaborate on what is the role of cohesion and the collective, not to use that term, but multiple humans together, connected in the human condition?
Sure. I keep getting the feeling that Yaron and I are actually having a disagreement about empirical reality, because I think that Enlightenment rationalist political thought features the individual, it features the state. There isn't a nation other than the nation. The people is, as a collective, is created by the state, and when the state disappears, then the collective disappears. Now, I think that when conservatives of all stripes look at this kind of thing, and then there's the state, and there really isn't anything else. When they look at that, it's a terrible theory, because when we try to understand any field of inquiry, any domain, any subject area, when we try to understand it, we try to come up with a small number of concepts and of relations among the concepts, which is supposed to be able to explain, to illuminate, as much as possible, the important things in the domain. Conservatives look at individuals in the state, and they say you're missing most of what's going on in politics, and also in personal human relations as well. But it just doesn't look like a description of human beings. It looks like a completely artificial thing. And then conservatives say, well, look, what's interesting adopt this artificial thing, then the consequences are horrific because you're not describing reality. So a conservative reality begins with an empirical view of what are human beings like. And the first thing you notice about human beings, or the thing I think conservatives notice, is that they're sticky, is that they clump, turn into groups. They take any arbitrary collection of human beings and set them to a task where you just leave them alone. And they quickly form into groups, which are always structured as hierarchies. Because of this competition within the hierarchies, there's going to be leaders and numbers. But there are every society, universally, there are groups compete, and there are hierarchies, these hierarchies, and there are internal competitions for groups. And when we think about scientific explanation, we allow that there are different levels of explanation. That a macroscopic object at the table, it doesn't have properties that are directly derived from the properties of the atoms or molecules, the microfibers that make up the table. And that's understood. There's what academic philosophers call emergent properties. To get up to the level of the table, it has properties like that you can't put your fist through it, which you can't necessarily know just by looking at the atoms alone. And I think conservatives say the same thing is true for political theory, for social theory. That looking at an individual human being and thinking about what does that individual human being need, which Euron does very eloquently in his writing. But that doesn't tell you what the characteristics are of this hierarchically structured group. As soon as you have that, it has its own qualities. An example which words together. And we need to answer that question. I try to answer it by saying there's such a mutual loyalty. Shorthand for human beings, individuals have the capacity to include another individual within their self, within their conception of their self. The two people do it. It creates a bond, like a bond between two atoms creates a molecule. That isn't individuality. Within the group, they may seem equal to one, but that isn't reality, a bond. That real bond is the stuff which political events in history are made. It's coming together, the fusion and the dissolution of these bonded loyalties. That's the reality of politics. And so when I hear these discussions about individuals in the state, I feel like it's most of the reality, and in order to understand the political reality, we need to understand what makes human beings cohere into groups, what makes them dissolve, what makes groups come apart and end up creating civil wars and that kind of thing. I think we also need to know what, in practice, rival groups do come together and bond. I mean, basically, when we think about democratic society, we're talking about different we call them tribes, or you can come up with a different name, but different tribal movements. They come together and they're able to do that, even though often they hate each other. Like we were talking about the American Revolution. Often they hate each other, and nevertheless they're able to come together. Why? How? And that leads us into questions like, how does honor, the giving of honor by one group to another, how does that increase the mutual loyalty between groups that are still competing with one another? All of these questions, I think, we have to answer in order to be able to talk about politics. And I think the first reason why one should approach politics as a conservative rather than as an individual is to give these theoretical tools to be able to talk about reality, which we don't have with politics. The individual's practice.
As you're talking, the metaphor that's popping up in my mind, and this is also something that bothers me with theoretical physics. The metaphor is, there's some sense in which there's things called theories that try to describe the basic laws of physics, how they interact together. As you do, you have a sense that you understand all of reality. a sense you do. And that to me, that to me is understanding the individual, like how the individual behaves in this world. But you're saying, hey, you're also forgetting chemistry, biology, how all of that actually comes together, the stickiness. Stickiness among how they build different systems, and some systems can kill each other, some can make pancakes and bananas, some can make poison and all those kinds of things, and we need to consider the full stack of things that are constructed from the fundamental basics. And I guess you're saying that you're just like the theoretical physicist. It all starts at the bottom. Like you need to preserve the fundamentals of reality, which is the individual, like the basic atom of human society.
So yes, so the basic unit, the basic moral, basic ethical unit in society is the individual, and yeah, of course they won't. And you can't understand history unless you understand formation and motivation, and I have a view about what kind of groups should be formed. And politically, from a political perspective, voluntary ones in which we join when we want to join, we leave when we want to leave, and ones that help us, and clearly groups help us, pursue whatever it is our goal is ultimately. So in pursuit of happiness, there are lots of groups that one wants to form, whether it's marriage, whether it's businesses, whether it's peace. So there are lots of groups. But the question is, what is the standard of well-being? Is it well-being some algorithm that maximizes the being of a utilitarian function? Is it something that's inherent in the group that we can as goodness, and to hell with the individuals within, as long as we can get at the group to function well? We don't really care about where the individuals are. So to me, the goal of creating groups is the well-being of the individual, and that's why it needs to be voluntary. That's why it has to be a way out of those. Sometimes it's costly. It's not a cheap out. That's why you should really think about what groups you and this, on an issue that's very controversial. Maybe we can. This is why to me, immigration is so important, right? Open immigration, free immigration, is because that's another group that I would like people to fall into the choose in and out, and I'd like to see people be able to go join that group that that they believe will allow for the pursuit of happiness. But let me say that that's a description of an ideal practice. I recognize that that's not the reality in which we live. I recognize that that's not the reality in which history, recognizing that that the individual exists in a sense philosophically is a massive achievement, right? Human beings, however they evolved, clearly we started out in a tribal context in which the individual didn't matter. We followed the leader. The competition was for power over the group. It dictates how the group should work. The history of human beings is a history of gaining knowledge, and part of the knowledge is the value of an individual. And you can see that in religion, you can see that in philosophy, you can see that through their evolution. And then, we evolved from tribes into nations, and then empires, and conflicts between nations, and conflict between empires. And we tried a lot of different things, if you will. I don't think we always did it on purpose, but we kind of different philosophies, different sets of ideas drove us towards different collectives, different groupings, and different ways in which to structure. And after, 3,000 years of kind of known history, there's history before that, but we don't know much about it. 3,000 years of known history. You can sit back and evaluate. And I think that's what is done in the Enlightenment. And you sit back, and certainly we can do it today, we can sit back and evaluate what promotes human flourishing, what doesn't. What do we need by who's flourishing? Well, individual human beings. Now, since I don't believe in a zero-sum world, not zero-sum, I see that it's empirically possible to show that the world is not a zero-sum. My human flourishing doesn't come in choice. So I can show that a system that promotes my flourishing is not human flourishing. The general welfare in that sense, individuals flourishing. And we can look at all these examples of how we've moved and what leads to bloodshed and what doesn't, and what promotes this ability to flourish as an individual. Again, and achieve the idea of individual flourishing. And then we can think about how to create a political system around that, a political system that recognizes and allows for the formation of groups, but just under the principle of voluntary. So you can't be forced to join it. You can't be coerced into forming a group. Other than the fact that you're born into a place, and in particular, that in a sense. But that's not force. There's a difference between metaphysics and between choices.
So this is something that came up in the debate that Yoram said that not all human relations are voluntary, and you kind of emphasized that a lot of where we are is not voluntary. We're grounded. We're connected in so much. So how can a human be free in the way you're describing? Individual be free if some part of who we are is not voluntary. Some part of who we are is other people.
Well, because what do we mean by freedom? Freedom doesn't mean the negation of the laws of physics, right? Freedom doesn't mean ignoring. Freedom means the ability within the scope of what's available for you to choose, being able to choose those things. In a political context, freedom means the absence of coercion. So once you're an adult, it says you're born with a particular context. Absolutely, but once you're an adult, I think it's incumbent on you to evaluate that religious context and look at different religions or non-religion or whatever, and choose your philosophy of life, choose your values, choose how you want to live your life. That's the freedom. The freedom is one system says, yeah, you're either coerced by the state or coerced by the group or coerced by society around you to follow a particular path, or the expectation is, the demand is, the pressure is to conform to a particular path. And my view is, no, you should be in a position to be able to choose your path. And that choice means you look around, you evaluate history, based on knowledge, based on all of these things, you choose what that path to be. That's fundamentally what freedom means. Yes, you cannot choose your parents, but of course not. Nobody claims that that's the scope of work.
I think the coercion and freedom dichotomy, these are too few concepts. Coercion and freedom, it's too simplistic to describe what we're actually doing. The traditional Anglo-conservative view is that society has to be ordered, it has to be peaceful. And there are two choices for how to be ordered. One is that a people is, by its own tradition, you would say voluntarily, these are mostly inherited traditions, by its own tradition, it is ordered. For example, people just generally will not go into somebody else's yard, because that's the custom here, is we don't go into somebody else's yard without the permission. And so for instance, we're talking about 500 years in the book. So for instance, you said the genius is that our government can lie very little because the people are so disciplined. It says the people are so disciplined. What he's saying is that our nation, our tribe, we have strong traditions which channel, through tools of honored and dishonored. That's a reality that exists in every society. It's not captured by your distinction between coercion and lack of coercion. When I'm dishonored if I don't care for my aging mother, I'm not being coerced like the state comes and puts a gun to my head. But I am being pressured. I'm being given guidelines.
But I'm saying that's wrong, and I'm saying that's because that can easily be used for bad traditions.
But
what's the standard by which we evaluate when a good tradition is invented? It's the English.
You're getting to the standard too fast. Wait. You're getting to the standard too fast. First, I want to know factually, is it true that all societies work like this? Because if it's true that all societies work like this, then saying we should be free from it is just a fantasy.
No, I don't think all societies. I think much of what happened in America post-founding in the 19th century didn't work like that. I think that's the genius of America. And I think what happened during the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, what happened in the 19th century, to some extent globally, but certainly in the United States, it didn't work that way. It broke tradition. I think all innovation breaks tradition. And I think that's what the genius of this country is and the post-Enlightenment world is. I think pre that tradition, it worked that way. And then the question is, did people understand why they do what they do? That is, I don't want people doing what I think is right just because I think it's right, and I've created a society in which, okay, somebody founded this country in particular ways. I want people to understand. So I want people to have a respect for property, not because it's a tradition, but because they understand the value of a respect for property. I want people not to murder one another, not because it's a commandment, thou shalt not murder, but because they have an understanding of why murdering is bad and wrong and bad for them and bad for the kind of world that they live. And I think that's what we achieve through enlightenment, through education, and where we don't treat people just as a blob, a tribe that just follows orders, but we now treat individuals as capable of thinking themselves, capable of discovering truth, capable of figuring out their own values, and that's the big break between, and this is the break I think that the Declaration represents, the break between society that is being conditioned, following commandments, following rules, because they are the rules, because they are the commandments, and a society where individuals understand those rules, understand, yes, it's now become a tradition, let's say, to respect the individual right, to respect property. But they're not following it because it's a tradition. They're following it because they understand what it is that makes it good. So that's the world I think that we are under the process of evolving. And that is what got destroyed in the 20th century and certainly what's made today. And I think that's a great tragedy, because we're evolving to a place where we understood the values that represent. And of course, the danger with tradition, we'll agree, right? It's okay to kill the Jew, right? Or it's okay to steal people's property if they're of a certain color, or to enslave. Those are all traditions. And yet, once you stop and say, but what are they based on? What is this right? Is this just? Based on some moral law? No, it's not. There's something wrong here. You can't achieve happiness and success.
You're talking about reason and tradition, but I think I would love to sort of linger on the stickiness of humans you described. So you kind of said this primary individuals, this primary knows a great invention. To me, it's not at all obvious that somehow that's the invention that humans have been practicing for a very long time, of the stickiness of community, of family, of a love. That's not obvious. That's not also fundamental to human flourishing. It should be celebrated and protected.
Of course it is.
Now, I suppose the argument you're making is you start to let the state define the stickiness, how the stickiness looks. But you're really like the voluntary aspect. But I just want to sort of the observation is humans is pretty happy when they form communities, however you define that. So romantic partnership, family.
Some communities, people are miserable in other communities, so the nature of the community matters. Some bondings are not healthy and not good to be involved in the adult life. So I absolutely, I'm a lover, not a fighter, right? So I'm a huge believer in love. The whole philosophy, I think, is a love-based philosophy. I fight in order to love. So it's love is at the core of all of this. It's a love of life. It's a love of the world out there, and it's a love of other people because they represent a value to you. So the stickiness is there. It's my point is, it should be chosen. It should be consciously chosen. And this is, put aside the state. Forget the state for a minute. Forget coercion. Forget all that. What I would encourage individuals to do, and this is where I'm not primarily a political voter, interested in politics. I think we talk most about that. I'm primarily interested in human beings and how they live, in a sense of morality. And what I would urge individuals is to think about their relationships, to choose the best relationships possible, but to outreach, because other human beings are immense value. And when I write, it's easy and obvious to think of it as a materialistic kind of thing. I do the chores this day, my wife does the chores the other day for free. But trading is much more subtle than that. Can be much more spiritual. It's about the trading in emotions. It's about everyone sees each other when gets from one. I think friendship is a form of trade. I know that seems to make it material, but I don't think trade is a material thing. But friendship is incredibly important. Love is incredibly important. Having friends.
How can I try to be eloquent now? Give people freedom. Give people, not politics, relationships. So this is interesting because we have a dynamic going on here in terms of beliefs that are differing and some overlaps. But there's a worry. If you look at human history, you study lots of the history of modern society. If you give people freedom in terms of stickiness of the relationship and so on, like if you not give people freedom, emphasize freedom as the highest ideal, you start getting more Tinder, online dating, the stickiness dissolves, just like in chemistry. You start to have a gas versus a liquid, right? That's the worry. So you have to study what actually happens. If you emphasize that the stickiness, the bonds to humans is holding you back, the exercise of voluntary choice is the highest ideal. The danger of that is for that to be implemented or interpreted in certain kinds of ways by uncivilized humans that are not, you could say we're perfectly reasonable and rational, think they're all of our decisions, but really, especially when you're young, you get horny, you make decisions that are suboptimal, perhaps. So the point is, you have to look at reality of when you emphasize different things. So when you talk about what is the ideal life, what is the ideal relations, you have to also think like, what do you emphasize? I think you both agree on what's important, that community can be important, that freedom is important, but what are you emphasizing? You're really emphasizing the individual, and you're emphasizing, you're emphasizing more of the community, of the family, of the stickiness of the nation.
Well, look, I don't want to deny the place of the individual. I think that there really is a very great change in civilization when the books of Moses announced that the individual was created God. That's a step that's, as far as we know, precedent in history, and to a very large degree, one of the things going on is that Yaron and I really do agree on all sorts of things. I think in part because we're both Jewish, and
you did say Yaron is basically Moses. Yes.
No, I said he was channeling Moses, but that's still in my book. That's still pretty good.
No, that's a compliment.
That's pretty good. For me, that's a compliment.
And we'll talk about this a little bit just for the listener, just so they know from amongst things we'll talk about nationalism. But you're also a religious scholar, so to at least leverage Bible. Not much, but some of the wisdom in your life.
Look, the way that Yaron looks at enlightenment, or maybe at Ayn Rand, that's the way that I see the Hebrew scripture and it comes from it. It has the same kind of place in my life. And I don't know how much we would put on this read, but I think that the agreement we do have about positive value of the creative individual, positive value of the individual's desire to improve work, and in my book that including his or her desire to improve his family, his tribe, his congregation, his nation. But it still comes from this kind of what your own call selfishness, the desire to make things better for yourself. Hebrew Bible, Judaism, that just is a positive thing. Of course, it can be taken too far, but it just is positive. It doesn't carry these kinds of, you should turn the other cheek, you should give away your cloak, you should love your enemy. These kinds of Christian tropes do not exist in Judaism. And so it just, I like your own. I do feel like he goes too far on various things, but I also hear, underneath it, I can sort of hear the Jewish current of resistance to things that about Christianity the Jews often find.
Can I ask you a question there? Can you make an argument for turning? I tend to
Just it's unjust. It's
I agree.
it's
okay.
Don't
So-
love yourself. It's a lack of love, lack of self-respect.
Well, let me push back on that because I like turn the other cheek, especially on Twitter. So
I like
no, what? So Twitter aside is more like you're investing in the long-term version of yourself versus the short-term. So that's the way I think about it. It's like the energy you put onto the world. Turn the other cheek philosophy allows you to walk to the fire gracefully. In some sense, I mean, perhaps you would frame that as not then that's not being altruistic or whatever. But there is something pragmatic that you approach to life.
disciplining yourself so that you become a better version of yourself. And not only do we agree, but I think every religious and philosophical tradition probably has a version of that. Even Kant, we join together in finding it to be terrible. Even Kant makes that distinction between the short-term interest and the long-term interest. So I think that's universal. I don't know if anybody was really disagreeing about that. The thing that we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, before we got onto this tangent, is the relationship between the individual who is of the image of God and is of value as an individual. Nevertheless, there's this question about what is good for that person, and also what makes him happy. I'm not sure that those are exactly the same things, but they're both certainly relevant and important. And I feel like, I think we're beginning to uncover this empirical disagreement about what it is that's good for the individual and what it is that makes them happy. I'll go back to I raised in the debate, which is this theory of Durkheim that now has been popularized by Jordan Peterson. Durkheim argues that he's writing a book on suicide. He's trying to understand what brings people to suicide. And he coins this term, anomie, lack of law. The argument is that individuals basically are healthy and happy when they find their place in a hierarchy. Because in a loyalty group, in a certain place in the hierarchy, they compete and struggle in order to rise in the hierarchy, but they know where they are. They know what their identity is, because they associate themselves. They're self-expansive to take on the leadership, the different layers, the past, and the future of this hierarchy. They're on. Some of these hierarchies are pernicious and oppressive, terrible, and some of them are better. My disagreement is that you find human beings who are capable of becoming healthy and happy by themselves without participating in this kind of. The minute that you accept, if you accept, that this is empirical reality about human beings, it's an iron law. You can't do anything. You can tell human beings that they can be free of all constraints all you want, and you can get them to do things that as you say, dissolve their. They can have contempt for hierarchies. They can say, I'm not going to serve the man. I'm going to, I'm just going to burn them all down. You can get them to say get kids to say all of these things. You can get them either to be Marxists who are actively trying to overthrow and destroy the existing hierarchies, or you can make them some kind of liberal where they basically pretend the hierarchies don't exist. They just act like they're not there. In both cases, it's not a coincidence that that's what universities teach us. Your choice is either Marxist revolution or liberal ignoring of the hierarchy. In both cases, what you've done is you've eliminated the possibility that the young person will be able to find his or her place in a way that allows them to grow and exercise their love, their drive, their creativity in order to advance something constructive. You've eliminated it, and you've put the burden on them, kind of a Nietzschean burden, to just be the fountain of all values yourself. Which maybe some people can do it, but almost no one can do it. And I think that's empirically true. And so I think by telling them about their freedom rather than telling them about how about the need to join into some traditionalist hierarchy that can be good and healthy for them, I think we're destroying them. I think we're destroying this generation and the last one and the next.
Yaron, is the burden of freedom destroying? What freedom? I mean, how many people are indeed free? Look, the problem is that we're caught up on political concepts, and we're moving into ethical issues, and I don't think it's right to tell people you're free, go do whatever the hell you want. Just use your emotions. Just go where you want to go. In the spur of the moment. Think short term. Don't think long term. Or don't think. Why think? One has to provide moral guidance, and morality here is crucial and crucially important. And part of taking responsibility for your own life is establishing a moral framework for your life, and what does it mean to live a good life? And that's much more important in the sense of a question, and it is my belief that people can do that. They can find and choose the values necessary to achieve a good life, but they need guidance. They need guidance. This is why religion evolved, in my view, because people need guidance. So Ayn Rand called religion a primitive form of philosophy. It was the original philosophy that provided people with some guidance about what to do and what not to do. And secular philosophy is supposed to do the same. And the problem is that I think religion and 99% of secular philosophy give people bad advice about what to do, and therefore they do bad stuff. And some of that sometimes, because when they do good stuff, it gets reinforced that we survive in spite of that. But ideas like Kant and Hegel and Marx and so on give young people awful advice about how to live and what to do, and as a consequence, really bad stuff happens. And the world in which we exist today, which we agree there are a lot of pathologies to it, there are a lot of bad stuff going on, in my view, is going the wrong way. In my view, a product of a set of ideas. On the one hand, I think Christian ideas. On the other hand, I think secular philosophical ideas that have driven this country and the world more generally in a really, really bad direction. And this is why what I do, because I think at the core of it, the only way to change it is not to impose a new set of ideas from the top, because I worry about who's going to be doing the imposition. Plus, I don't believe you can force people to be good. It's to challenge the ideas. It's to question the ideas. It's to present an alternative view of morality, an alternative set of moral principles, ultimately an alternative view of political principles. But it has to start with morality. If you don't, and my morality is centered on the individual and what the individual should do with his life in order to attain a good life. I believe that leads to happiness, but the good life That's why it's good, right? The goal is survival and thriving and flourishing and happiness ultimately. But politics is a servant of that, and it's not an end in itself. So the real issue is, you asked before, what is the value of relationship? There's enormous value in relationships because we get values from other people. We don't produce all our values. We don't produce all our spiritual values. And we don't produce all our material values. Other people are a massive benefit to us because they produce values we can't. There's a massive division of labor in terms of values, not just in economics, but also in philosophy and elsewhere. It's why we have teachers. It's why we have moral teachers. Moral teachers are important to help guide us towards a good life. Not all of us are philosophers. But what I do demand, if you will, of individuals, this is where I put a burden on people, right? Understand what you do, right? Don't embrace a moral teaching because it was tradition. Don't embrace a moral teaching because your parents embraced it. Don't embrace a moral teaching just because your teachers are teaching it. Challenge it. Think about it. Embrace it because you embrace it. You might be wrong. You might embrace the wrong one, but take moral responsibility. Take responsibility over your life by evaluating, testing, challenging what you have received and choosing what you're going to pursue. And I acknowledge that most people don't do that. And this is why intellectual leadership is so important. This is why you want to get people, you want the voices in a culture to be good voices so that those people who don't think for themselves will end up being followers, but they end up being followers of something good versus followers of something bad. But for the thinkers in the world out there, who I think are the people who count, who are the people who shape society,
No, shape society.
Wait a minute, not count in a sense that you can dismiss the lives of others and, because I'm, obviously I'm anti-coercion and anti-violence.
You sound like Plato.
But yes, I don't want to sound like Plato. But in a sense that they're the ones who end up shaping the world. They're the ones who end up shaping how the world is. I want those people to make choices about their values and not to just accept them based on tradition or based on commandment or based on where they happen to grow up. And in that sense, again, I do, and this is an interesting point where we disagree, but I'm not exactly sure what Joan's position is. I do believe in universal values. That is, there are things that are good, and there are things that are evil, and I think we'd agree on that. And there are systems. We agree that communism and fascism are evil. Well, I think we should be able to agree that some political systems are good. Yeah. And maybe there's this middle ground where we both think that they're not particularly bad, but not particularly good, and you all might think they're better than I think they are. But if we can agree on this is good and this is evil, right? Then the systems that tend towards the good are good, evil are evil. But that's universal, right? I look at places like South Korea, Japan, Asia. Cultures that are very, very different in many respects, and yet when they adopt certain Western ideas, right, about freedom, about liberty, about individualism. I mean, the Japanese Constitution, because MacArthur forced it in there, has the pursuit of happiness in the Constitution, not because they chose it because he put it in it, but they, to some extent, adopted that, and they're successful. They're successful places today. Those societies in Asia that didn't adopt these values are not successful societies today.
You're on. Japan has a birth rate of, what is it? 1.1, 1.2 children per woman. I mean, look, there are some things. There's some places where you give people freedom. This is also biblical, right? The idea that everyone did what's right in his own eyes. Okay, right. This is a refrain in the Book of Judges, and the Bible is not an anti-freedom book. There's many. Look,
Let's talk.
No, we're not. Fine.
We'll get there.
Okay.
He's gonna guide.
Okay, look. Just as an asterisk, I'm not asking you because the Bible is such a great authoritarian book. It's not that at all. In my view, if you want to know where where this what you call the sanctity of property, where does the sanctity of property comes from? It comes from the Ten Commandments. It comes from saying I haven't taken anything from anyone. It comes from Samuel saying, I haven't taken anything from anyone. It's the condemnation of Achav, of the unjust kings who steal the property of their subjects. So I'm not. So I'm property and freedom. I think there's for it in the Bible. But right now, I'm focusing on this other question, which is what happens when everyone does what's right in his own eyes. That's the book of Judges, and that's this civil war, moral corruption, theft, idolatry, murder, rape. I mean, that's what happens when everyone does whatever's right in his own eyes. Well, no, that's what it says in the text. I'm not okay. So when I look at, you're right. There are things that I think are objectively true. I think it's really hard to get people to agree to them. Almost impossible. But when I look at a country which is approaching one birth per woman, in other words, half of the minimum necessary for replacement, you can say whatever you want about immigration. We can have that discussion. But the point is that when your values are such that you're not even capable of doing the most basic techniques that human beings need in order to be able to propagate themselves and their values and the way they see things, then look, you're finished. You can't say that.
So if I implied that Japan is an ideal society, I take that back. But
no,
let's think about Japan for a minute.
I just think we're in trouble, and we're in trouble.
Yeah. Give me a second. Hold you. I'm sorry.
It's his show, man. We entered into his hierarchy.
Yeah,
that's it.
We should talk about higher. But no, just to clarify, how do you explain the situation in Japan? Is it the decrease in value of family, like some of the
We're grinding Minecraft. Still gainfully employed. Only regenerate health when your saturation is high. Yeah, that's not true. If you turn it off, saturation is a hidden status increase by eating nutritious food. No, you can eat any food. If you want to regen health, you should spread your jump order to delete your accuracy food. Yeah, that's not the case. We have that game off. I don't know who you are, stuff and things. If I've met you, if I know who you are, then I don't connect that to your username. This is the Patreon only stream. Oh my goodness. We're in a snowy area. Oh boy, there's mountains and such in this snowy area. I think the goal is to get to the Nether. And to get to the Nether, we have to get diamonds. And to get diamonds, we sort of have to dig down. I think after, how many hours have I been streaming? 3 hours?